There are cases that remain vivid long after every question has been answered, not because they were violent, nor because they were complicated, but because they taught me how easily honest people mistake what they believe they have seen. On a cold autumn evening in 1938, I accepted an invitation to board the Midnight Express leaving King's Cross for the north. Before dawn, one of my fellow passengers would be dead inside a locked railway compartment. At the time, I believed I had boarded an ordinary overnight journey. I could not have known that every answer already surrounded me, hidden within the smallest and most ordinary observations.
There are evenings when the world seems content to leave a man to his own thoughts. Such evenings had become increasingly precious to me. They arrived without ceremony, asked for nothing beyond a comfortable chair and a modest fire, and rewarded even the simplest routines with a sense of quiet satisfaction. My little cottage had long encouraged such habits. Sheltered behind a low stone wall and surrounded by windswept fields, it seemed to withdraw from the concerns of the wider world whenever darkness settled over the countryside. On that particular evening, the rain had begun before sunset and showed every intention of accompanying the night to its conclusion. It swept steadily across the windows, sometimes whispering softly against the panes, sometimes striking them with a determined insistence whenever the wind gathered strength. Beyond the glass, little remained visible except the occasional pale outline of the old ash tree whose branches bent and swayed beneath the storm. Every so often, a distant flash of lightning revealed the hedgerows for an instant before returning them to darkness once more. Within the cottage, however, another world prevailed. A coal fire glowed comfortably in the grate, its warmth filling the sitting room with the familiar fragrance of polished oak, old books, and drying wool. Shelves lined two walls from floor to ceiling, carrying volumes accumulated over many years without any obvious plan beyond personal affection. A long case clock occupied the far corner, measuring the evening with patient dignity, while a brass kettle rested upon the hob, murmuring quietly whenever the fire found fresh life beneath it. I sat in my favorite leather chair, with a blanket drawn lightly across my knees and a well-thumbed volume open before me. It was not new reading. Indeed, I suspected I knew many passages almost by memory. Yet certain books improve with acquaintance in much the same way that long-standing friendships do. One ceases to seek surprise and instead enjoys the reassuring company they provide. The chapter before me concerned the correspondence of an 18th century clergyman whose observations upon parish life possessed a dry wit that had never failed to amuse me. Outside, the storm might do as it pleased. Inside, there existed only the steady glow of the fire, the quiet ticking of the clock, and the contentment that accompanies an uninterrupted evening. For a considerable time, I neither moved nor spoke. The fire settled with a gentle sigh. The kettle whispered. Rain travelled endlessly across the roof. There are occasions when silence itself becomes companionable. Eventually, I closed the book. Not because I had tired of it, but because I found my attention wandering toward the weather beyond the curtains. Storms have always interested me less for their violence than for their effect upon ordinary life. Roads emptied, windows glowed more warmly, travellers became purposeful. Even familiar landscapes acquired a curious intimacy when reduced to the small circle illuminated by a lantern or motorcar headlamp. It struck me that anyone abroad on such a night must possess a reason stronger than comfort. The thought lingered only briefly. I rose to prepare fresh tea. The routine required little conscious attention. A warmed pot, loose leaves measured by long habit rather than calculation, water lifted from the patiently waiting kettle, and finally the pleasant fragrance that always seemed capable of improving both room and temperament. While the tea rested, I added 2 fresh pieces of coal to the fire. Golden sparks climbed briefly into the chimney before disappearing from sight.
The room answered with renewed warmth. Cup in hand, I returned to my chair, intending to devote another peaceful hour to my book before retiring. It seemed likely that the weather would worsen before midnight,
and I found no objection to allowing it to perform that task without my assistance. I had scarcely reopened the volume when another sound entered the evening. 3 measured knocks. Not loud, not hurried, simply deliberate. I looked toward the front door. Visitors after dark were uncommon enough in the countryside. Visitors during a storm of this severity were rarer still. The knocking came again. 3 calm raps. Whoever waited outside possessed neither impatience nor uncertainty. Setting my cup aside, I crossed the narrow hall and opened the door. A gust of rain-cooled air swept immediately into the cottage. Standing upon the step beneath the dripping oilskin cape was Thomas Ellery, the young telegraph messenger from the village. Water ran steadily from the brim of his cap, while his bicycle rested against the garden gate, its lamp casting a modest yellow circle upon the rain-darkened lane. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," he said, removing his cap. "Urgent wire from London." I suspected it was unlikely to be a social visit, I replied with a small smile. He returned it gratefully. "No, sir." He produced a buff-colored envelope, carefully protected beneath his cape despite the weather. I accepted it. "You've had a difficult ride. The lower roads nearly flooded." "I'm not surprised." He glanced toward the lane. "I ought to be on my way before it grows worse." "I believe the storm has already made every effort in that direction." A brief laugh escaped him. "Good evening, sir. And to you. Ride carefully." "I shall." Within moments he had mounted his bicycle and disappeared into the darkness, the little lamp bobbing gently through the rain until it vanished beyond the hedgerow. I closed the door and returned to the welcome warmth of the sitting room. For a moment I simply regarded the envelope in my hands. Telegrams possess a character entirely their own. Letters may wander through pleasantries before reaching their purpose. Telegrams seldom indulge themselves. Every unnecessary word has already been sacrificed before they reach their destination. Breaking the seal, I unfolded the single sheet within. The message read, "Urgent. Stop. Your immediate assistance requested aboard Midnight Express departing London for Edinburgh tonight. Stop. Circumstances of a highly unusual and potentially serious nature have arisen. Stop. Your discretion is essential. Stop. Details upon arrival. Stop." There was no signature, only the London office from which it had been dispatched. I read the telegram again. Then once more. It disclosed remarkably little. No names, no explanation, no indication of who had requested my presence or why my discretion had been considered of greater value than any details that might have accompanied the message. Whether the omission arose from haste, caution, or simple necessity, I could not determine. Someone, however, had gone to considerable trouble to ensure the telegram reached me before the departure of the Midnight Express. That fact alone deserved attention. The long case clock sounded the half-hour. Its familiar chime lingered gently in the room before yielding once more to the rain. I folded the telegram with care and slipped it into my waistcoat pocket. There remained, naturally, the possibility of declining an anonymous request. Prudence seldom objected to caution. Yet experience had also taught me that genuine urgency often arrived wearing the untidy clothes of incomplete information. Whatever awaited aboard that train had prompted someone to seek assistance without delay. That alone was sufficient. I crossed to the small cupboard beneath the stairs and withdrew my travelling valise. Time had softened the leather until it seemed almost to remember my hands. It had accompanied me through more counties than I could readily recall, acquiring the honest marks of years spent upon railway platforms, country roads, and village inns. Upon the writing desk, I assembled those few articles I rarely travelled without. Fresh linen, a clean collar, my leather-bound notebook, a fountain pen, a newly filled bottle of black ink wrapped securely against the hazards of travel, my silver-rimmed magnifying glass, polished before returning it to its protective case. After a brief pause, I unlocked the lower drawer of the desk. Inside rested a small revolver. I regarded it for a moment before lifting it carefully into my hand. It was not an object I welcomed, nor one I had often found reason to carry. Nevertheless, long experience had impressed upon me that prudence sometimes required preparations one sincerely hoped would remain unnecessary. Having satisfied myself that it was in proper order, I wrapped it discreetly and placed it beneath the folded clothing within the valise. The catches closed with a quiet click. Returning to the sitting room, I banked the fire so that it would remain safely through the night. My book still lay open beside the chair. The teapot retained enough warmth for another cup. Everything about the room invited me to remain precisely where I was. There is always a quiet reluctance in leaving a place of comfort voluntarily. Yet duty rarely consults convenience before making its appointments. Drawing on my heavy coat, I fastened the final button, took up the valise, extinguished the lamp, and stepped outside. The rain met me immediately. Its cool persistence filled the darkness with a steady, endless rhythm that seemed to stretch from the fields beyond the cottage to places I could not yet imagine. Somewhere to the south, hidden behind miles of storm and night, the midnight express waited beneath the great iron roof of the London station. Whatever had prompted that anonymous telegram remained unknown. Before another night had passed, I intended to learn the answer.
The rain had a curious way of altering familiar distances. Roads that appeared comfortably brief beneath a summer sky acquired unexpected length when travelled through darkness and weather. Every bend demanded greater patience, every mile a little more attention, until the journey itself seemed less concerned with reaching its destination than with safely preserving those who attempted it. I paused only long enough to secure the cottage door before crossing the short path to the small garage that stood beside the stone wall. Rain pattered steadily upon its slate roof, while the lantern above the entrance cast a warm circle of light across the puddled yard. Within waited my motor car. It had served me faithfully for several years, and possessed none of the unnecessary refinements that manufacturers had lately begun advertising with increasing enthusiasm. It was dependable, easily maintained, and had acquired the reassuring habit of starting whenever genuinely required. That, in my experience, was recommendation enough. I stowed the valise carefully upon the passenger seat before returning to the rear of the vehicle for one final inspection. A travelling man soon learns that 2 minutes spent checking straps, lamps, and tyres at the beginning of a journey may spare him 2 unpleasant hours before its conclusion. Satisfied, I climbed behind the wheel. The engine protested only briefly before settling into a low, familiar rhythm. Its steady vibration felt oddly companionable against the silence of the surrounding fields. The garage doors swung closed behind me, and a moment later I guided the motor car onto the narrow country lane. Almost immediately the rain thickened. The headlamps illuminated little beyond a shimmering tunnel of water. Hedgerows emerged from the darkness only as they approached the edge of the road, retreating once more into blackness almost as soon as they had appeared. Here and there standing water reflected the lamps with deceptive brightness before disappearing beneath the tyres in a gentle spray. I drove without haste. There is little virtue in arriving punctually if one arrives recklessly. The telegram remained folded within my waistcoat pocket, its few carefully chosen words returning to my thoughts more than once as the miles slipped quietly behind me. Circumstances of a highly unusual and potentially serious nature have arisen. It was an oddly balanced sentence, specific enough to discourage complacency, general enough to reveal almost nothing. Equally curious was the request for discretion. There are occasions when silence serves justice better than immediate explanation. Whether this proved to be one of them remained to be discovered. The road descended gradually toward the village. Lights appeared ahead, softened by rain until each seemed surrounded by its own faint halo.
The public house still showed signs of modest activity despite the weather, while the grocer's windows had long since surrendered their glow to darkness. Somewhere beyond the church tower, a dog barked once before apparently deciding that nothing worthwhile could be accomplished outdoors. The railway station lay another 20 minutes beyond. As I continued southward, the countryside slowly yielded to wider roads and more frequent traffic. Here a lorry laboured patiently through the storm. There another motor car approached with lamps carefully shaded against the weather, before disappearing once more into the darkness behind me. No one lingered upon such roads unless necessity compelled them. From time to time the wind strengthened, carrying rain almost sideways across the windscreen. The wipers maintained their measured rhythm, sweeping clear the accumulating water only for fresh droplets to replace it an instant later. There was something quietly hypnotic in their movement, a steady accompaniment to the hum of the engine and the soft hiss of tires upon wet pavement.
I found my thoughts returning less to the telegram than to the unknown person who had sent it. Who aboard the Midnight Express possessed both the authority to summon assistance and the confidence that I might provide it? A railway official? A passenger? Someone known to me? Or perhaps someone who knew only of my reputation through another's recommendation? The possibilities were numerous. The evidence at present was non-existent. Experience had taught me that speculation enjoys running considerably faster than fact. Whenever possible, I preferred allowing the latter sufficient opportunity to catch up. Another mile passed, then another. The rain never ceased. At length, the glow of London began announcing itself upon the horizon, not as individual buildings, but as a broad amber haze suspended beneath the clouds. Even during poor weather, the city possessed an unmistakable presence, announcing itself long before one reached its outskirts. Traffic increased steadily. Motor omnibuses moved deliberately through the wet streets. Taxicabs waited outside hotels beneath glistening awnings. Policemen stood beneath capes whose shining surfaces reflected the electric lamps above. Although the hour had grown late, London never entirely abandoned wakefulness. The station rose from the rain like a great cathedral of iron and glass. Steam drifted beneath the enormous roof, mingling with smoke until both disappeared among the latterwork high overhead. Lamps stretched away in long orderly rows above the platforms. Their golden light reflected countless times upon rain-darkened stone. Even before I entered, the familiar sounds reached me. The sharp whistle of a guard, the metallic clank of couplings, porters calling to one another across the platforms, the deep, measured breathing of locomotives preparing for departure. Every large station possesses its own music. Unlike the countryside, where silence forms the greater part of every composition, a railway terminal lives through rhythm and industry. Steam escaped in measured sighs. Wheels clicked gently over points. Boots echoed beneath vaulted roofs, while distant announcements dissolved into the constant murmur of travellers' beginning and ending journeys. Leaving the motor car with an attendant, I collected my valise and stepped beneath the shelter of the station canopy. The contrast was immediate. Rain still fell beyond the platform, visible as silver threads beneath the lamps. Yet within the great roof, the air carried instead the warm scent of coal smoke, damp wool, polished brass, and fresh newspapers. A porter approached, touching the brim of his cap. "The Midnight Express, sir?" "I hope so." He smiled. "Platform 7. Due away in about 25 minutes. "My thanks." He lifted the valise almost before I had finished speaking. "If you'll follow me." We walked together beneath the immense roof. Passengers moved with quiet purpose in every direction. Some hurried toward departing trains with the anxious determination peculiar to those who feared missing them by mere seconds. Others lingered beside refreshment rooms over final cups of tea. Families exchanged embraces beneath drifting steam, while business travelers consulted pocket watches with increasing frequency. The porter threaded his way through the activity with practiced ease. "Busy tonight," I observed. "Storms slowed a few services," he replied.
nothing unusual for this time of year. He nodded toward a locomotive several platforms away. "She's the Edinburgh Express." The engine stood magnificent beneath the station lamps. Dark green paint gleamed beneath beads of rain. Brass fittings shone with meticulous care. White steam curled lazily around the great driving wheels before drifting upward into the roof. Even before I entered, the familiar sounds reached me. The sharp whistle of a guard, the metallic clank of couplings, porters calling to one another across the platforms, the deep, measured breathing of locomotives preparing for departure. Every large station possesses its own music. Unlike the countryside, where silence forms the greater part of every composition, a railway terminal lives through rhythm and industry. Steam escaped in measured sighs. Wheels clicked gently over points. Boots echoed beneath vaulted roofs, while distant announcements dissolved into the constant murmur of travellers beginning and ending journeys. Leaving the motor car with an attendant, I collected my valise and stepped beneath the shelter of the station canopy. The contrast was immediate. Rain still fell beyond the platform, visible as silver threads beneath the lamps. Yet within the great roof, the air carried instead the warm scent of coal smoke, damp wool, polished brass, and fresh newspapers. A porter approached, touching the brim of his cap. "The Midnight Express, sir?" "I hope so." He smiled. "Platform 7, due away in about 25 minutes. "My thanks." He lifted the valise almost before I had finished speaking. "If you'll follow me." We walked together beneath the immense roof. Passengers moved with quiet purpose in every direction. Some hurried toward departing trains with the anxious determination peculiar to those who feared missing them by mere seconds. Others lingered beside refreshment rooms over final cups of tea. Families exchanged embraces beneath drifting steam, while business travelers consulted pocket watches with increasing frequency. The porter threaded his way through the activity with practiced ease. "Busy tonight," I observed. "Storms slowed a few services," he replied. "Nothing unusual for this time of year." He nodded toward a locomotive several platforms away. "She's the Edinburgh Express." The engine stood magnificent beneath the station lamps. Dark green paint gleamed beneath beads of rain. Brass fittings shone with meticulous care. White steam curled lazily around the great driving wheels before drifting upward into the roof.
She seemed less a machine than a living creature, patiently gathering breath before a long night's journey. "The Midnight Express has a fine reputation," I remarked. "So she has, sir." The porter lowered his voice slightly. "Drivers say she'll keep her schedule through weather that'd send most trains back to the sheds." There was unmistakable affection in the remark. Railwaymen often speak of locomotives much as sailors speak of trusted ships. The porter continued, "Long run tonight, Edinburgh by morning if the line holds." "If the line holds?" He glanced toward the rain beyond the platform. "Nothing to worry about, sir, just this weather. Signalmen earn their wages on nights like these." We had almost reached platform 7 when a gentleman hurried past us carrying an umbrella that had clearly surrendered any contest with the wind. His coat was thoroughly soaked, yet he maintained an expression of cheerful resignation rather than annoyance. "Nearly missed it," he muttered to no one in particular before disappearing into the waiting train. The porter chuckled. "Wouldn't be an express without at least one passenger arriving at the last possible moment." Ahead of us, the sleeping cars stretched into the darkness beyond the platform. Their windows glowed warmly against the storm. Curtains had already been drawn in several compartments. Attendants moved quietly along the train, checking reservations, assisting passengers with luggage, and exchanging the calm, efficient courtesies that suggested long familiarity with overnight travel. The porter slowed. "Here we are, sir." He set the valise gently upon the platform. I thanked him and reached for my wallet. Before he could accept the gratuity, another voice spoke from behind me. "I beg your pardon?" I turned. Approaching with measured steps was a railway inspector in a neatly pressed dark uniform, his cap glistening faintly beneath the station lights.
He carried himself with the quiet assurance of a man accustomed to solving practical problems before they became larger ones. "Am I addressing," he paused politely, "the gentleman expected from the countryside this evening?" "I believe that depends upon who expects him." A faint smile crossed his face. "I rather hoped you might say that." He produced a folded envelope. "My name is Inspector Doyle." He inclined his head. "I have been asked to place this in your hands the moment you arrived." I accepted the envelope. It bore neither seal nor inscription, only my name. The inspector's expression remained composed. "I'm afraid I know very little myself," he said, "only that someone aboard the Midnight Express requested that you be met without delay." "Did they leave a name?" "No, sir." He glanced briefly toward the waiting train. "But I believe you will receive your answers shortly." The locomotive released a deep, resonant plume of steam. Somewhere farther along the platform, a guard's whistle sounded once. The journey, I suspected, was about to begin.
Inspector Doyle waited with the patient composure of a man who understood that hurried explanations seldom improved upon measured ones. Behind him, the Midnight Express stretched away beneath the vast iron roof, each polished carriage catching the station lamps in long ribbons of amber light. Steam drifted lazily between the coaches, occasionally obscuring the train before parting once more to reveal its gleaming windows. I glanced at the envelope in my hand. It was of good quality, unsealed, and addressed only with my name in a neat, restrained script. Nothing about it suggested haste, despite the urgency that had carried me across the countryside. "I presume," I said, "that I am expected to read this before boarding." "I believe that would be wise, sir." His answer carried neither curiosity nor emphasis. He merely stepped half a pace aside, affording me a little privacy while remaining available should I require him. I unfolded the single sheet within. Its contents were considerably more informative than the telegram, though still remarkable for what they declined to explain. "My dear sir, forgive the anonymity of my telegram. Circumstances have developed with unexpected rapidity, and I judged it wiser to communicate only what necessity demanded. Upon boarding the Midnight Express, kindly present this note to the senior sleeping car attendant, who has been instructed to escort you directly to me. I ask only that you observe carefully before reaching any conclusions. Several incidents, insignificant when viewed separately, have together produced a degree of unease that I cannot satisfactorily explain. I would greatly value your independent judgment before any formal accusations are made. Your obedient servant." There was no signature, only a small flourish where one might ordinarily have expected it. I read the note twice before folding it carefully and returning it to the envelope. Inspector Doyle observed me without intrusion. "I gather," he said at length, "that matters remain rather mysterious." "They remain politely mysterious." A faint smile appeared beneath his neatly trimmed moustache. "I've known railway correspondents to be considerably less polite." "You have not been informed of the sender's identity?" "No, sir." "And no disturbance has been reported?" "Nothing that would justify delaying departure." His answer was immediate. The station superintendent was quite firm on that point. "Then whatever concerns our correspondent has not yet become a railway matter." "I should say that's fair." He glanced briefly along the platform, where a porter hurried past with a trolley of leather trunks. "The train is operating entirely as scheduled." That observation interested me. If the situation aboard had already developed into an emergency, one might reasonably expect visible signs of agitation. Instead, the platform presented the familiar choreography of an overnight departure. A young couple stood beside an open carriage window exchanging quiet farewells. Two commercial travelers debated the weather while consulting pocket watches.
A porter adjusted luggage straps with methodical concentration. Farther ahead, a sleeping car attendant assisted an elderly lady onto the train with such practiced courtesy that she scarcely appeared to notice the movement. Nothing suggested alarm. Indeed, had it not been for the anonymous note resting in my pocket, I might easily have concluded that the evening differed little from any other. "There is one thing," Inspector Doyle said. "Oh? Our correspondent requested that you not announce yourself generally. I had no intention of doing so. I'm pleased to hear it." His expression remained composed. Discretion was mentioned more than once. "So I've noticed." The locomotive released a slow, resonant sigh of steam. It echoed beneath the great roof before dissolving among the iron arches overhead.
There is a curious quality to railway stations immediately before departure. For much of the day they bustle with obvious purpose. Yet in those final minutes before an express leaves, the activity seems to acquire a quieter confidence. Conversations become shorter. Doors close with increasing frequency. Porters exchange fewer words. Every movement suggests long-established routine approaching its inevitable conclusion. The station itself appeared almost to inhale. A guard walked steadily along the platform, examining carriage doors one final time. Signals glowed beyond the far end of the train, their coloured lights softened by drifting rain. Somewhere overhead, pigeons shifted invisibly among the roof girders. "I believe," said Inspector Doyle, "your carriage is the fourth from the rear." "My thanks." He inclined his head. "I hope your journey proves less eventful than your summons suggests." "I confess," I replied, "that I hope precisely the same." He smiled politely. "Good evening, sir." "And to you." With valise in hand, I turned toward the train. The polished brass handle of the nearest carriage felt pleasantly cool beneath my glove. A sleeping car attendant, immaculate in dark uniform despite the weather, acknowledged me with a courteous nod. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening. May I see your ticket?" I produced it. He examined it only briefly before stepping aside. "Compartment 4, sir." "My thanks." "And," he added with the slightest hesitation, "were you perhaps asked to present a note?" I withdrew the envelope. Recognition appeared immediately. "If you'll permit me." He read only the first line before folding it again with evident care. "Certainly, sir." His manner altered almost imperceptibly. Not alarm, not deference, merely the quiet attentiveness of someone entrusted with a specific responsibility. "If you would be so kind as to follow me once we've departed, I'll conduct you to the gentleman who requested your attendance." "So he is already aboard?" "Yes, sir." "Has he given any indication of the nature of his concern?" "I'm afraid not." The attendant's answer appeared entirely genuine. "He merely asked that you be brought to him privately." "I see." He handed back the envelope. "In the meantime, your compartment has been prepared." I stepped inside. Warmth greeted me almost immediately. The corridor extended the length of the carriage beneath softly shaded lamps whose gentle glow reflected from polished walnut panelling. Brass fittings gleamed without ostentation, while the thick carpet beneath my feet subdued every footstep into little more than a whisper. The air carried the agreeable scent of beeswax, fresh linen, and faint coal smoke drifting forward from the locomotive. Outside, rain continued tracing silver paths across the windows. Within, the carriage possessed all the reassuring order expected of a well-managed railway. The attendant opened a compartment door. "Here you are, sir." It was compact without feeling confined. A broad upholstered seat occupied one side beneath the window. Opposite stood a neatly folded washstand concealed within polished cabinetry. Above, luggage racks of woven brass held ample space for the modest requirements of overnight travellers. A reading lamp cast warm light across the compartment without disturbing the comforting shadows gathered in its corners. I placed my valise upon the rack. The attendant spoke again. "Dinner service begins shortly after departure." "Excellent. If there's anything further you require?" "Nothing at present." "Very good, sir." He withdrew quietly, closing the door with remarkable gentleness.
For a few moments I remained alone. The station beyond the rain-streaked glass appeared softened by steam and distance. Porters moved like figures glimpsed through early morning mist, while passengers settling into neighboring compartments became little more than fleeting silhouettes framed by warm interior lamps. A whistle sounded, short, clear, answered almost immediately by another farther along the train. The locomotive responded with a deeper voice altogether. Steam billowed past the window. Almost imperceptibly at first, the carriage shifted beneath me. A slight tightening of the couplings travelled the length of the train. Then another. The sensation reminded me of some great animal awakening limb by limb before committing itself to movement. Without haste, the platform began to drift. Station lamps slid slowly past the window. The rain beyond seemed suddenly alive, illuminated in countless bright droplets before vanishing into darkness. London was falling behind. The Midnight Express had begun her journey north. Inspector Doyle waited with the patient composure of a man who understood that hurried explanations seldom improved upon measured ones. Behind him, the Midnight Express stretched away beneath the vast iron roof, each polished carriage catching the station lamps in long ribbons of amber light. Steam drifted lazily between the coaches, occasionally obscuring the train before parting once more to reveal its gleaming windows. I glanced at the envelope in my hand. It was of good quality, unsealed, and addressed only with my name in a neat, restrained script. Nothing about it suggested haste, despite the urgency that had carried me across the countryside. "I presume," I said, "that I am expected to read this before boarding." "I believe that would be wise, sir." His answer carried neither curiosity nor emphasis. He merely stepped half a pace aside, affording me a little privacy while remaining available should I require him. I unfolded the single sheet within. Its contents were considerably more informative than the telegram, though still remarkable for what they declined to explain. "My dear sir, forgive the anonymity of my telegram. Circumstances have developed with unexpected rapidity, and I judged it wiser to communicate only what necessity demanded. Upon boarding the Midnight Express, kindly present this note to the senior sleeping car attendant, who has been instructed to escort you directly to me. I ask only that you observe carefully before reaching any conclusions. Several incidents, insignificant when viewed separately, have together produced a degree of unease that I cannot satisfactorily explain. I would greatly value your independent judgment before any formal accusations are made. Your obedient servant." There was no signature, only a small flourish where one might ordinarily have expected it. I read the note twice before folding it carefully and returning it to the envelope. Inspector Doyle observed me without intrusion. "I gather," he said at length, "that matters remain rather mysterious." "They remain politely mysterious." A faint smile appeared beneath his neatly trimmed moustache. "I've known railway correspondents to be considerably less polite." "You have not been informed of the sender's identity?" "No, sir." "And no disturbance has been reported?" "Nothing that would justify delaying departure." His answer was immediate. The station superintendent was quite firm on that point. "Then whatever concerns our correspondent has not yet become a railway matter." "I should say that's fair." He glanced briefly along the platform, where a porter hurried past with a trolley of leather trunks. "The train is operating entirely as scheduled." That observation interested me. If the situation aboard had already developed into an emergency, one might reasonably expect visible signs of agitation. Instead, the platform presented the familiar choreography of an overnight departure. A young couple stood beside an open carriage window, exchanging quiet farewells. Two commercial travelers debated the weather while consulting pocket watches. A porter adjusted luggage straps with methodical concentration. Farther ahead, a sleeping car attendant assisted an elderly lady onto the train with such practiced courtesy that she scarcely appeared to notice the movement. Nothing suggested alarm. Indeed, had it not been for the anonymous note resting in my pocket, I might easily have concluded that the evening differed little from any other. "There is one thing," Inspector Doyle said. "Oh? Our correspondent requested that you not announce yourself generally. I had no intention of doing so. I'm pleased to hear it." His expression remained composed. Discretion was mentioned more than once, so I've noticed.
The locomotive released a slow, resonant sigh of steam. It echoed beneath the great roof before dissolving among the iron arches overhead. There is a curious quality to railway stations immediately before departure. For much of the day they bustle with obvious purpose. Yet in those final minutes before an express leaves, the activity seems to acquire a quieter confidence. Conversations become shorter, doors close with increasing frequency, porters exchange fewer words. Every movement suggests long-established routine approaching its inevitable conclusion. The station itself appeared almost to inhale. A guard walked steadily along the platform, examining carriage doors one final time. Signals glowed beyond the far end of the train, their coloured lights softened by drifting rain. Somewhere overhead, pigeons shifted invisibly among the roof girders. "I believe," said Inspector Doyle, "your carriage is the fourth from the rear." "My thanks." He inclined his head. "I hope your journey proves less eventful than your summons suggests." "I confess," I replied, "that I hope precisely the same." He smiled politely. "Good evening, sir." "And to you." With valise in hand, I turned toward the train. The polished brass handle of the nearest carriage felt pleasantly cool beneath my glove. A sleeping car attendant, immaculate in dark uniform despite the weather, acknowledged me with a courteous nod. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening. May I see your ticket?" I produced it. He examined it only briefly before stepping aside. "Compartment 4, sir." "My thanks." "And," he added with the slightest hesitation, "were you perhaps asked to present a note?" I withdrew the envelope. Recognition appeared immediately. "If you'll permit me." He read only the first line before folding it again with evident care. "Certainly, sir." His manner altered almost imperceptibly. Not alarm, not deference, merely the quiet attentiveness of someone entrusted with a specific responsibility. "If you would be so kind as to follow me once we've departed, I'll conduct you to the gentleman who requested your attendance." "So he is already aboard?" "Yes, sir." "Has he given any indication of the nature of his concern?" "I'm afraid not." The attendant's answer appeared entirely genuine. He merely asked that you be brought to him privately. "I see." He handed back the envelope. "In the meantime, your compartment has been prepared." I stepped inside. Warmth greeted me almost immediately. The corridor extended the length of the carriage beneath softly shaded lamps whose gentle glow reflected from polished walnut paneling. Brass fittings gleamed without ostentation, while the thick carpet beneath my feet subdued every footstep into little more than a whisper. The air carried the agreeable scent of beeswax, fresh linen, and faint coal smoke drifting forward from the locomotive. Outside, rain continued tracing silver paths across the windows. Within, the carriage possessed all the reassuring order expected of a well-managed railway. The attendant opened a compartment door. "Here you are, sir." It was compact without feeling confined. A broad upholstered seat occupied one side beneath the window. Opposite stood a neatly folded washstand concealed within polished cabinetry. Above, luggage racks of woven brass held ample space for the modest requirements of overnight travellers. A reading lamp cast warm light across the compartment without disturbing the comforting shadows gathered in its corners. I placed my valise upon the rack. I have often thought that the first minutes aboard a departing train possess a peculiar tranquility unlike any other form of travel. One has already committed oneself to the journey. Decisions have been made. The world outside recedes of its own accord, leaving little to do except observe the changing landscape,
and the company with whom one shall share the coming hours. The rhythm of the wheels soon established itself beneath the carriage, soft, measured, almost musical. It rose through the floorboards with reassuring regularity, accompanied by the occasional muted creak of polished timber adjusting itself to movement. The train seemed already to possess its own heartbeat. A discreet knock interrupted my thoughts. The attendant stood once more in the doorway. "We've just departed, sir." So I gathered. A smile briefly touched his features. "The gentleman who requested your attendance asks only that you make yourself comfortable for the present." "Oh?" "He feels it preferable that you first dine with the other passengers." I regarded him with mild curiosity. That is an unusual instruction. "So I thought myself, sir." "Did he offer a reason?" "No, only that there is no immediate urgency. He was rather particular about those words." I nodded. "In that case, I shall gladly accept his hospitality." "I thought you might." "Dinner at what hour?" "In approximately 15 minutes." He withdrew once more. Left alone again, I watched the last lights of London surrender gradually to darkness beyond the suburbs. Somewhere farther ahead in this long procession of sleeping compartments and polished corridors waited the anonymous correspondent whose carefully chosen words had summoned me from my fireside. Who he was, why he preferred anonymity, and what quiet unease had persuaded him to seek an outsider's judgment were questions that I trusted would soon answer themselves. For the present, however, the Midnight Express asked only that her passengers settle comfortably into the rhythm of the journey. The movement of a well-appointed express train encourages observation. Unlike travel by motor car, where one's attention belongs chiefly to the road ahead, the railway grants its passengers the luxury of becoming students of their surroundings. I exchanged my travelling coat for a lighter jacket and stepped into the corridor. Soft lamps, shaded in cream glass, cast an inviting glow along the polished panelling. Their light swayed almost imperceptibly with the motion of the carriage. A gentleman of advanced years emerged from the neighbouring compartment carrying a folded newspaper. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening. Weather seems determined to accompany us. It appears unwilling to be left behind." He smiled. "A fortunate thing we're indoors." I should agree. Our conversation ended there, entirely to our mutual satisfaction. Railway etiquette has long recognized that companionship need not require prolonged discussion. Farther along, an attendant stepped aside to allow a young mother and her daughter to pass. The little girl, no more than 8, clutched a well-loved cloth rabbit. "Mind the sway, Miss Alice," said the attendant kindly. "I am." "Excellent." She looked up with complete seriousness. "Does the train ever get sleepy?" "I believe she merely grows quieter." The child accepted the answer without question. Her mother smiled apologetically. "I hope she isn't disturbing anyone." "Quite the contrary," I replied. "She has improved my understanding of railways." The little girl beamed before continuing toward the dining carriage. As I followed, the express negotiated a gentle curve. China rattled faintly somewhere ahead before settling once more into silence. The train seemed less like a collection of coaches than a single living organism, each carriage quietly dependent upon the others as they pressed northward through the rain. The dining carriage greeted me with warmth, polished silver, and the inviting aroma of fresh soup and baked bread. White linen covered every table, crystal reflected softly beneath shaded lamps. The atmosphere resembled that of a respectable London club transported into the countryside. Only half the tables were occupied. A steward approached. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening. Your place has been reserved."
"If you'll follow me." He led me to a table prepared for 4. 3 places were already occupied. The first belonged to a gentleman perhaps 60 years of age, broad-shouldered despite advancing years, with neatly brushed silver hair and the weathered complexion of a man who had spent much of his life outdoors. He rose politely. "Colonel Ashcombe."
We exchanged introductions and shook hands. His grip was firm without becoming competitive. Years of military habit still governed his movements. Beside him sat a younger gentleman in his early 30s, whose notebook disappeared beneath the tablecloth as I approached. Harold Finch. A pleasure. I assure you, he said with a slight laugh, I'm not working. Our young friend appears incapable of travelling without taking notes, observed the Colonel. They become useful later. So does memory. I've never entirely trusted mine. There was something refreshingly candid about him. The fourth chair remained empty. Our final companion appears delayed, said the Colonel. Almost on cue, another gentleman approached. He was neatly dressed, perhaps in his middle 40s, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of a professional accustomed to listening more than speaking. His expression possessed a natural kindness that immediately recommended him. I hope I haven't kept everyone waiting? Not in the least, replied the Colonel. He sat Charles Meredith. The name meant nothing to me, though I found myself liking him almost immediately. Mr. Meredith thanked the steward by name after noticing the brass badge upon his jacket. When an elderly passenger nearby struggled with a walking stick, he rose at once to assist before returning quietly to his seat. The gestures were so natural that one scarcely noticed them. Only afterwards did I reflect that genuine courtesy rarely announces itself. Conversation began easily. The Colonel spoke of improvements to modern locomotives. Mr. Finch regretted that increasing railway speeds allowed less opportunity to appreciate the countryside. Mr. Meredith glanced toward the rain-darkened window. Tonight, he said, I suspect the countryside would have preferred not to be appreciated. The remark produced quiet laughter. The first course arrived with admirable punctuality. Clear consommé was served in delicate porcelain bowls bearing the understated crest of the railway company. Warm rolls followed, with butter resting upon chipped ice. The stewards anticipated every request before it was spoken and compensated effortlessly for the movement of the train. I have always maintained, declared Colonel Ashcombe after tasting the soup, that one may judge a railway by its dining carriage. And your verdict? Asked Finch. Highly favourable. Mr. Meredith nodded. One spends so many hours aboard these journeys that a proper dinner becomes more than a luxury. It becomes reassurance. An excellent way of putting it, I observed. He smiled. My profession requires frequent travel. May I ask your profession? I am a solicitor, commercial law chiefly, estates when required. Considerably less exciting than popular novels would have one believe. I imagine most professions suffer from that affliction, said the Colonel. I suspect so. Mr. Meredith spoke plainly and listened attentively whenever another held the floor. There was neither boastfulness nor false modesty in his manner. Such men often inspire confidence before one can identify precisely why. The main course followed. Roast lamb, buttered potatoes, carrots glazed with honey, and fresh peas were served upon warmed plates. Outside, rain continued its endless conversation with the windows. Inside, the dining carriage seemed entirely detached from the storm. Mr. Finch glanced toward the darkness. It always surprises me how completely the world disappears after nightfall. In what sense? I asked. You know perfectly well there are villages, fields, perhaps an entire town not half a mile away. He gestured toward the black window, and yet one sees nothing. Railway travel requires a certain faith, said the Colonel. Precisely. Mr. Meredith continued studying the glass. One begins believing only in what exists aboard the train. The remark lingered with me. Already the station seemed impossibly distant. My cottage, the rain upon its windows, the fire beside which I had taken tea, all had assumed the curious unreality of memory. Conversation wandered comfortably from travel to books, then to architecture, and finally to the stubborn persistence of English weather. Mr. Finch confessed an enthusiasm for railway photography. The Colonel admitted collecting military memoirs. Mr. Meredith revealed an unexpected affection for gardening. My roses never prosper unless I ignore them. I've found the same true of people, said the Colonel. A ripple of quiet laughter circled the table. I noticed that Mr. Meredith laughed easily, not loudly, but with unaffected sincerity. It occurred to me that one could scarcely imagine him making an enemy. Dessert consisted of warm apple tart served with thick cream. Coffee followed. The stewards moved discreetly among the tables, refilling cups, while conversation softened into smaller groups. The express had settled fully into her overnight stride, no longer accelerating or adjusting, but proceeding north with calm certainty. I found myself studying the faces around the dining carriage. An elderly clergyman reading quietly by himself. A pair of sisters engaged in whispered conversation. A businessman consulting ledgers despite the late hour. Young Alice asleep against her mother's shoulder while still clutching her faithful rabbit. Everywhere I looked, I observed ordinary people engaged in ordinary pursuits. No raised voices,
No visible anxiety, no hint that anyone aboard believed themselves participants in anything remarkable. If unease truly existed upon this train, it concealed itself with extraordinary success. Coffee concluded. Chairs slid gently backward. Passengers drifted toward lounges and sleeping compartments. The Colonel rose first. "A pleasure dining with you, gentlemen." "The pleasure was ours," said Mr. Meredith. Mr. Finch gathered his notebook. "I believe I'll spend a little while in the observation lounge." "Still taking notes?" asked the Colonel. "Only mental ones." Mr. Meredith smiled. "I think I shall stretch my legs before turning in. Perhaps we'll meet again over breakfast." "I hope so," I replied. He disappeared into the corridor with the same quiet composure he had displayed throughout the evening. I remained only long enough to notice how completely the train had changed. Dinner's gentle bustle had yielded to the first stillness of night. Doors were closing. Reading lamps glowed behind frosted glass. Voices diminished. The midnight express seemed to settle comfortably into itself, as though preparing for the long miles ahead. It was then that I heard my name spoken quietly behind me. "Sir." I turned. The same sleeping car attendant stood waiting with unobtrusive patience. "I beg your pardon. The gentleman who requested your attendance asks whether you might receive him now." I regarded him for a moment. "So the time has come." "Yes, sir." His voice remained low, respectful of the growing silence. "If you'll be so kind as to accompany me." Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the forward carriages. I followed. The steady rhythm of the wheels beneath us continued unchanged, carrying the midnight express ever farther into the rain-darkened night. It was then that I heard my name spoken quietly behind me. "Sir." I turned. The same sleeping car attendant stood waiting with unobtrusive patience. "I beg your pardon. The gentleman who requested your attendance asks whether you might receive him now." I regarded him for a moment. "So the time has come." "Yes, sir." His voice remained low, respectful of the growing silence. "If you'll be so kind as to accompany me." Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the forward carriages. I followed. The steady rhythm of the wheels beneath us continued unchanged, carrying the midnight express ever farther into the rain-darkened night. The attendant neither hurried nor lingered. He proceeded with the measured pace of a man who had walked these corridors 1,000 times and knew instinctively how to accommodate the movement of the train. I followed a respectful distance behind, my footsteps softened by the thick carpet that ran the length of the sleeping carriage. The midnight express had settled fully into the business of the night. Compartment doors stood closed, their frosted panes glowing warmly where reading lamps still burned within. Here and there came the quiet turning of a page, the faint click of a washstand being folded away, or the muted murmur of husband and wife preparing to retire. Beneath every sound lay the patient, unwavering rhythm of the wheels. The attendant glanced over his shoulder.
"I trust your dinner was satisfactory, sir?" "Extremely." "I thought you would find the company agreeable. You appear to know your passengers rather well." He smiled modestly. "One cannot help forming impressions after enough journeys." "And what impression have you formed this evening?" He considered the question with unexpected care. "A particularly courteous company." Nothing in either his words or manner suggested concealment. If uneasiness existed aboard the train, it had not yet disturbed the ordinary habits of those responsible for her comfort. We passed into the next carriage. Its corridor was slightly narrower, the polished walnut panels interrupted at intervals by brass-framed mirrors that reflected the gentle sway of the lamps. Outside, rain traced fleeting silver lines across the black windows before vanishing into the darkness beyond. Presently, the attendant slowed. "Just ahead, sir." He lowered his voice almost instinctively. The gentleman requested privacy. I should expect nothing less. He inclined his head and stopped before a compartment whose blind had been drawn. No light escaped beneath the door. For the first time since leaving London, I became conscious that every step had carried me toward the purpose of my journey. The attendant raised one hand and gave 3 quiet knocks. A pause followed, then a calm voice from within answered, "Come." The attendant opened the door only far enough to announce my arrival. "The gentleman you requested, sir." "Thank you." He stepped aside, allowing me to enter, before withdrawing into the corridor and closing the door behind me with practiced silence. The compartment was larger than my own, furnished as a private saloon for first-class passengers. A shaded reading lamp stood upon the table beneath the window, casting a pool of warm light over neatly arranged correspondence, a silver cigarette case that remained unopened, and a half-finished cup of coffee. The occupant rose as I entered. He was a gentleman of perhaps 55 years, clean-shaven, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the composed bearing one associates with successful businessmen. Though plainly tired, he carried himself with habitual dignity. He extended his hand. "I owe you an apology for summoning me without explanation, for summoning you at all."
His handshake was firm, yet I detected the slightest tremor in his fingers. "I am Arthur Pembroke." The name was immediately familiar. Even those with little interest in commerce had heard it spoken in connection with railway engineering, shipping contracts, and several notable charitable foundations. "I appreciate your willingness to come at such short notice," he continued. "The telegram suggested urgency." It did, but not panic. I took great care that it should not. He motioned toward the chair opposite his own. "Please." I sat. For several moments neither of us spoke. Mr. Pembroke seemed intent upon arranging his thoughts with the same precision evident in the papers before him. Beyond the window, the darkness flowed silently past, broken only now and then by the brief glow of a distant signal. At last he folded his hands. "You must think this an extraordinary beginning. I have learned that extraordinary beginnings often precede surprisingly ordinary explanations. I sincerely hope you prove correct." The words were spoken with a faint smile that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. "You mentioned in your letter," I said, "that a number of insignificant incidents had, taken together, given you cause for concern." "I did." "And that you wished for an independent judgment before making any accusation." "Exactly." He leaned back. "My difficulty, sir, is that each occurrence is trivial when viewed alone. Were I to report any one of them to the authorities, I should rightly be considered an anxious old man with an overactive imagination. And together, he hesitated, together they persuade me that something aboard this train is profoundly wrong." He fell silent. The steady rhythm of the wheels continued beneath us, patient and untroubled, as the midnight express carried every soul aboard deeper into the rain-darkened countryside. Mr. Pembroke rose and crossed slowly to the window. Though the blind had been lowered, he lifted one corner with absent-minded fingers and looked out into the darkness.
Nothing met his gaze save the occasional flash of a signal lamp and the pale reflection of his own face upon the rain-streaked glass. "It is an odd sensation," he said quietly, "to feel entirely enclosed by civilization while being utterly beyond its immediate reach. The railway has always possessed that quality. Yes." He released the blind. "One cannot simply leave. One cannot summon assistance. One travels onward at the speed and direction determined by others." "I dare say I sound melodramatic." "Not at all. You sound observant." For the first time since my arrival, he appeared faintly reassured. "I am relieved to hear you say so." He rested one hand upon the correspondence lying neatly before him. "I have spent the greater part of the evening attempting to persuade myself that I have merely allowed several unrelated incidents to combine into an imaginary pattern." "And have you succeeded?" "No." His answer came with quiet certainty. "I find myself less convinced of that explanation with every passing mile." Outside, the steady cadence of the wheels continued beneath us. Within the compartment, the shaded lamp cast a warm circle of light that seemed curiously detached from the endless darkness beyond the window. "You mentioned several incidents," I said. "Perhaps we should consider them individually before attempting to discover whether they truly belong together." "That was precisely my hope." He inclined his head gratefully. "I feared that, were I to recount them all at once, they might sound absurd." "Most genuine mysteries begin as absurdities." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "I suspected you might say something of the sort." He opened the leather portfolio before him with meticulous care. "I have resisted making any formal accusation because I possess no evidence worthy of the name. A prudent course. Nevertheless," his fingers paused upon a folded sheet of notepaper, "I cannot dismiss the conviction that someone aboard this train is concealing something of consequence." He looked directly at me. "I do not yet know whether that concealment concerns dishonesty, desperation, or something infinitely more serious." The train gave a gentle sway as it entered a broad curve. Neither of us spoke until the movement had settled once more into its familiar rhythm. At length I said, "Then let us begin at the beginning." Mr. Pembroke drew a slow breath. "Very well." He folded his hands upon the table as though arranging the facts in his own mind before entrusting them to another. "It started," he said, "before dinner." "I dare say I sound melodramatic." "Not at all. You sound observant." For the first time since my arrival, he appeared faintly reassured. "I am relieved to hear you say so." He rested one hand upon the correspondence lying neatly before him. "I have spent the greater part of the evening attempting to persuade myself that I have merely allowed several unrelated incidents to combine into an imaginary pattern." "And have you succeeded?" "No." His answer came with quiet certainty. "I find myself less convinced of that explanation with every passing mile." Outside, the steady cadence of the wheels continued beneath us. Within the compartment, the shaded lamp cast a warm circle of light that seemed curiously detached from the endless darkness beyond the window. "You mentioned several incidents," I said. "Perhaps we should consider them individually before attempting to discover whether they truly belong together." "That was precisely my hope." He inclined his head gratefully. "I feared that, were I to recount them all at once, they might sound absurd." "Most genuine mysteries begin as absurdities." A fleeting smile crossed his face. "I suspected you might say something of the sort." He opened the leather portfolio before him with meticulous care. "I have resisted making any formal accusation because I possess no evidence worthy of the name." A prudent course. Nevertheless, his fingers paused upon a folded sheet of notepaper. "I cannot dismiss the conviction that someone aboard this train is concealing something of consequence." He looked directly at me. I do not yet know whether that concealment concerns dishonesty, desperation, or something infinitely more serious. The train gave a gentle sway as it entered a broad curve. Neither of us spoke until the movement had settled once more into its familiar rhythm. At length I said, "Then let us begin at the beginning." Mr. Pembroke drew a slow breath. Very well. He folded his hands upon the table as though arranging the facts in his own mind before entrusting them to another. "It started," he said, "before dinner."
The quiet rhythm of the train altered so gradually that it was several moments before I became consciously aware of the change. Dinner had yielded to that peculiar stillness which settles over an overnight express once the day's conversations have been concluded. Behind polished compartment doors, lamps burned softly beneath lowered shades. Somewhere farther back, a steward collected the last of the coffee service, each piece of china meeting its neighbour with restrained precision before silence reclaimed the corridor. The attendant who had conducted me to Mr. Pembroke's apartment had long since withdrawn, leaving us alone. Mr. Pembroke remained seated opposite me, one hand resting lightly upon the leather portfolio upon the table. "It started," he repeated, "before dinner." He paused, not from uncertainty, I thought, but from a determination to recount each incident exactly as he remembered it. "I arrived unusually early," he said. "There seemed no advantage in waiting upon the platform while the rain worsened. I settled into my compartment and spent perhaps half an hour reviewing several business papers." He touched the portfolio almost absent-mindedly. "Nothing remarkable occurred then?" "Nothing." "And afterwards?" "I took a short walk through the train." He looked thoughtfully toward the compartment door. "I have travelled this route many times. One grows accustomed to observing little changes. New attendants, altered furnishings, different passengers." "Did anything attract your attention?" "Not at first." The train rounded a gentle curve, causing the lamp above us to sway almost imperceptibly. Beyond the rain-streaked window, a distant signal flashed briefly across the compartment before disappearing once more into darkness. "I encountered Mr. Meredith." "The solicitor?" "Yes." "You knew him previously?" "For many years." His answer came without hesitation. "He has acted as legal advisor to several of my companies." "You appear to hold him in confidence." "I always have." He spoke with evident sincerity. He has proved capable, discreet, and unfailingly dependable. Nothing in either his expression or tone suggested the slightest reservation. "I see." We exchanged no more than ordinary pleasantries. He remarked upon the weather and inquired after my health. "You noticed nothing unusual?" "No." He frowned faintly. "That, perhaps, is precisely what troubles me. Everything was perfectly ordinary." I made no reply. Experience had taught me that apparent normality often deserved as much attention as obvious irregularity. Mr. Pembroke continued. "Later I passed through the dining carriage while it was still being prepared. One of the stewards apologized for a slight delay with the coffee service." "The coffee service?" "Yes." I thought little of it. His fingers rested quietly upon the edge of the table. I recall another member of staff mentioning that a flooded carriage earlier in the day had caused several practical inconveniences. "What sort of inconveniences?" "Oh," he searched his memory. "I believe he spoke of linen having been moved elsewhere, something about one of the service cupboards being emptied." He gave an apologetic smile. I fear I paid little attention. Naturally. There was nothing upon the face of it to distinguish such conversation from the innumerable practical observations one overhears during travel. "And after dinner?" "I returned here." "You remained alone?" "For a time." He hesitated. I then asked the attendant whether the gentleman named in my telegram had arrived. The attendant confirmed that I had boarded. "Yes." I thought it preferable that we should first meet privately before involving anyone else. He looked steadily at me. I am now beginning to wonder whether I delayed too long. Before I could answer, 3 restrained knocks sounded upon the compartment door. Mr. Pembroke looked up. "Come."
The attendant entered. "I beg your pardon, sir." His composure remained admirable, though I fancied his voice carried a trace of uncertainty absent earlier in the evening. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. What is it?" The attendant glanced briefly toward me. "I'm afraid there is a small difficulty." "What sort of difficulty?" "It concerns your compartment, sir." "My compartment?" "Yes." Mr. Pembroke rose at once. "I don't understand." "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but another gentleman has been attempting to make contact with you." "For what reason?" "I cannot say. He believed you had already retired. I told him you were occupied." "And?" The attendant shifted uneasily. "When he received no reply from your compartment, he assumed you had gone elsewhere." Mr. Pembroke looked puzzled rather than alarmed. "I have, of course." "Quite so, sir." The attendant lowered his voice. "The difficulty is that no one seems certain whether anyone has entered your compartment since." "A curious statement." "You mean," I said quietly, "that no one has actually seen Mr. Pembroke return there after dinner?" The attendant considered my wording. "No, sir. I don't believe they have." Mr. Pembroke gave a slight laugh. "Then I fear I have caused unnecessary confusion." "So it would appear." The attendant looked visibly relieved. "I wondered whether you might accompany me, sir." "Certainly." Mr. Pembroke turned to me. "Perhaps you had better come as well." I was about to suggest the same. We stepped into the corridor together. The warmth of the compartment yielded to the cooler air of the sleeping carriage. Lamps glowed at measured intervals along the polished panelling, their reflections drifting slowly across the brass fittings as the train maintained its steady progress northward. Most compartment doors were now closed. Behind one came the quiet rustle of turning pages. Behind another, the faint murmur of a wireless enthusiast describing some distant station to an increasingly sleepy companion. Elsewhere, silence. The wheels beneath us maintained their patient cadence. We proceeded several compartments before the attendant slowed. "There, sir." Mr. Pembroke's compartment stood exactly as one would expect. Its blind remained drawn. The door was closed. A small crowd had gathered without any appearance of disorder. Colonel Ashcombe stood nearest the window, hands clasped behind his back with military correctness. Harold Finch hovered several paces away, notebook forgotten in one pocket, his youthful curiosity struggling visibly against good manners. Mr. Meredith was speaking quietly with another attendant. He turned immediately upon seeing us. "Pembroke!" Relief spread naturally across his face. "My dear fellow, there you are!" Mr. Pembroke looked from one familiar face to another. "I appear to have become unexpectedly popular." A ripple of subdued amusement eased the atmosphere. "We feared something might be amiss," Meredith said. "You retired after dinner." I altered my plans. "So I see." He smiled warmly. "I am very glad of it." Colonel Ashcombe inclined his head. "I suggested there was probably a perfectly sensible explanation." "You were correct." The second attendant stepped forward. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. There is no harm done. I knocked several times. I'm afraid I wasn't inside to answer." "No, sir." He looked distinctly embarrassed. "I ought perhaps to have realized as much." Mr. Pembroke reached for the compartment door. "Shall we put everyone's mind at ease?" "By all means," said the colonel. The handle turned. The latch clicked softly. Mr. Pembroke pushed the door inward. The compartment was empty. For several seconds, no one spoke. The lamp burned quietly above the neatly arranged seat.
The blind remained lowered against the rain-darkened window. His travelling rug lay folded precisely where it had been placed earlier in the evening. His walking stick rested against the corner beside the seat. Everything appeared perfectly orderly. Everything appeared untouched. And yet the owner of the compartment stood beside me in the corridor, staring into it with exactly the same astonishment as the rest of us. No one moved. The quiet rhythm of the wheels continued beneath our feet with the same measured certainty as before, while the lamplight within the compartment rested upon every familiar object exactly where one expected to find it. Mr. Pembroke was the first to recover himself. "I confess," he said, "that I fail to understand." "Nor do I," replied Colonel Ashcombe, peering past him into the compartment. "Everything appears perfectly in order." Mr. Meredith regarded the interior with mild perplexity. "I was quite certain this was your compartment." "It is." "And you have not entered it since dinner?" "I have not." The solicitor nodded thoughtfully, as though the answer merely confirmed what he had already suspected. "I fear we have disturbed everyone over a misunderstanding." "It would seem so," said the Colonel. Harold Finch, who had remained respectfully behind the others, ventured a cautious question. "May I ask what caused everyone to become concerned?" The attendant answered before anyone else could. "One of the stewards wished to deliver a message, sir. Receiving no reply, he assumed Mr. Pembroke had retired early. When there was still no answer after some time," he hesitated, "well, naturally we became uncertain." "Quite naturally," I said. The small gathering relaxed almost imperceptibly. An explanation, however ordinary, possesses a remarkable ability to disperse uneasiness. Yet I remained where I was. My attention had settled not upon the people assembled in the corridor, but upon the compartment itself. "May we step inside, Mr. Pembroke?" "Certainly." He stood aside at once. The compartment possessed the same comfortable proportions as my own, though the arrangement reflected the habits of its occupant rather more distinctly than mine did. A travelling rug lay neatly folded upon the seat. A newspaper rested upon the small table beside the window. The shaded reading lamp burned with steady warmth, casting a pleasant circle of light across polished walnut and brass. Nothing appeared disordered. Indeed, there was an almost studied tidiness about the room. Mr. Pembroke moved directly toward the table. "I left these papers here before dinner." He touched the leather portfolio. "I believe they remain exactly as I arranged them." "You are certain?" "I should say so." He opened the portfolio briefly, glanced at its contents, and closed it again. "I see nothing disturbed." Colonel Ashcombe smiled. "There, you see. The railway has merely succeeded in manufacturing a mystery where none existed." His remark was made without mockery. It represented the sensible conclusion toward which the available facts appeared to point. "Perhaps," I said. The Colonel looked at me. "You are not convinced?" "I have not yet decided whether there is anything requiring conviction." That answer appeared to satisfy him. Experience had taught me that conclusions reached too readily often required revision later. I crossed slowly to the window. The blind remained lowered. When I lifted one corner, only darkness greeted me. Rain coursed steadily across the glass, while at intervals the pale gleam of distant signal lamps slipped briefly through the storm before vanishing again into the countryside. The window itself was securely fastened. No moisture had penetrated the frame. I lowered the blind once more. Mr. Finch had quietly produced his notebook. "I hope you won't object," he said apologetically. "To what?" "I find it easier to remember conversations if I write a few words." "I have no objection, provided you record only what is actually said. I should never dare improve upon reality." There was an earnestness about the young man that made irritation difficult. Meanwhile, Mr. Meredith had stooped to retrieve a railway timetable lying beneath the edge of the seat. "I imagine this simply slipped." "So it would appear," I replied. He replaced it exactly where he believed it belonged. The movement struck me as characteristic. Throughout the evening, I had noticed that he possessed a quiet instinct for restoring order without drawing attention to himself. Some men create calm merely by entering a room. Mr. Meredith appeared one of them. The attendant lingered uncertainly near the doorway. "I do hope you'll forgive the interruption, gentlemen." "There is nothing to forgive," said Mr. Pembroke kindly. "You acted entirely properly." Visible relief crossed the man's face. "I appreciate your saying so, sir." When he had withdrawn, the little company diminished naturally. Colonel Ashcombe consulted his watch. "I believe I shall retire."
He inclined his head to Mr. Pembroke. "I'm glad to discover you haven't disappeared after all." A faint smile passed among us. "As am I," said Mr. Pembroke. The Colonel departed with measured military precision. Mr. Finch followed after a moment, though not before casting one final curious glance around the compartment. "I dare say," he admitted, "I had hoped for something more mysterious." "The night is still young," said Mr. Meredith pleasantly. "I suppose it is." The journalist disappeared down the corridor. Presently only 4 of us remained: Mr. Pembroke, Mr. Meredith, myself, and the steady sound of the train. Mr. Meredith looked toward his old client. "I hope this unpleasant little misunderstanding hasn't added to your anxieties. It has merely puzzled me. I continue to think you've been carrying too many responsibilities." Pembroke smiled faintly. "That is hardly a novel accusation. It is nevertheless true." There was genuine concern in the solicitor's voice. Nothing in his manner suggested affectation. He seemed precisely what he had appeared throughout the evening, an exceptionally considerate man. "If you'll excuse me," he continued, "I think I'll leave you both in peace." He wished us good night and withdrew quietly into the corridor. His footsteps soon merged with the rhythm of the train. Mr. Pembroke watched the closed door for several moments. "A remarkable fellow. So you have known him long?" "Nearly 20 years." "And trusted him throughout?" "Entirely," he answered without reflection. "I have seldom encountered a more dependable adviser." I nodded but offered no comment. Trust, like suspicion, was a subject best approached through evidence rather than opinion. At length I resumed my slow examination of the compartment. Nothing seemed out of place. The berth had not yet been prepared by the attendants. The washstand remained neatly folded away. The luggage rack held Mr. Pembroke's travelling case precisely as he remembered leaving it. His umbrella occupied the corner nearest the door. His walking stick rested against the seat. I paused before it. "You have not touched this since boarding?" "No." "You carried it into the compartment yourself?" "Yes." "It has remained there ever since?" "So far as I know." I regarded it for a moment before moving on. The observation possessed no immediate significance. Still, small habits often reveal themselves more faithfully than dramatic actions. A gentleman generally places familiar possessions where convenience suggests rather than ceremony. Once established, such arrangements rarely alter without reason. I seated myself opposite him. "Mr. Pembroke." "Yes?" "You mentioned earlier that several incidents aboard this train had begun to trouble you." "I did. I wonder whether we might now approach them differently." "In what way?" "Rather than asking what occurred, let us ask what you personally witnessed." He looked at me with quiet interest. "I am not sure I understand." "It is a distinction worth making." He folded his hands. "Very well. You told me of conversations before dinner." "Yes." "You described meeting Mr. Meredith." "I did." "You recalled remarks from railway staff." "Quite so." I leaned back slightly as the carriage negotiated another gentle curve. "What I should like to establish now is something more exact." He waited. "From the conclusion of dinner onward, which events did you actually observe yourself?" I allowed the question to settle between us with the quiet cadence of the wheels beneath the floor. "And which have you merely been told occurred afterwards?" Mr. Pembroke did not answer immediately. The train had entered a stretch of uneven track, and the wheels beneath us passed over the rail joints with a firmer, more deliberate cadence. The reading lamp trembled slightly upon its bracket. A faint metallic complaint travelled through the carriage, then subsided as the express returned to smoother ground. At last he said, "I witnessed very little after dinner." "Let us be precise." He inclined his head. "I left the dining carriage shortly after coffee was served." "Alone?" "No, Meredith walked with me as far as the connecting vestibule." "And then?" "He continued toward the rear of the train. I returned here." "You entered this compartment?" "Yes." "You are certain?" A faint look of surprise crossed his face.
Naturally. Certainty is rarely offended by being examined. He accepted the rebuke with good grace. I entered, placed my portfolio upon the table, and remained perhaps 5 minutes. What did you do during those 5 minutes? I reviewed a letter. Which letter? He opened the portfolio and withdrew a folded sheet. This one. I accepted it. It was a formal communication upon the headed paper of Pembroke Engineering and concerned an adjourned meeting with a northern shipping concern. The contents were unremarkable, though several paragraphs had been marked lightly in pencil. You made these marks? Yes. Here in the compartment? Yes. I laid the letter beside the portfolio. What happened next? I went in search of the attendant. For what purpose? To ask whether you had arrived. And after speaking with him, I was conducted to the private saloon where we met. You did not return here? No. Nor send anyone here? Not to my knowledge. I looked again around the compartment. The little room appeared to offer nothing beyond the ordinary comforts of railway travel. Yet ordinary rooms, when examined carefully, often disclosed the habits of those who had occupied them. A chair retained the angle at which a man had risen. Ash remained in a tray. A book lay open where attention had deserted it. Even the air might preserve the mingled traces of tobacco, soap, damp cloth, or recently poured spirits. Mr. Pembroke's compartment seemed to possess no such memory. I crossed to the upholstered seat and pressed one palm lightly against its surface. The fabric was cool. Where did you sit while reading the letter? There. He indicated the place beneath my hand. For 5 minutes? Approximately. I examined the upholstery more closely. Its nap ran evenly from one end to the other, except for a narrow disturbance near the armrest where something had rested against it. Not a man's shoulder, the mark was too small. I turned toward the walking stick. You placed that there when you boarded? Yes. It has not been moved? I cannot swear to it. But it appears, as you remember, it does. The ferrule stood squarely upon the carpet. The curved handle leaned against the polished panel beside the seat. No dampness remained upon it, though the wood had acquired the dull luster of something recently wiped. You used it upon the platform. Certainly. The platform was wet. Extremely. I crouched and examined the carpet beneath the ferrule. It was dry. Mr. Pembroke watched me. Is that significant? Not necessarily. An attendant might have wiped the stick before placing it inside. Mr. Pembroke himself might have done so without remembering. The compartment had been warm for some time, and moisture could have evaporated. Still, a small crescent of grit ordinarily remained where a wet ferrule had rested upon railway carpet. Here there was none. I rose. When you entered after dinner, did you move the stick? No. Did you use it? I believe not. You walked from the dining carriage without it? Yes. He glanced toward the corner. I had forgotten I left it here. That was possible. The distance was short, the corridors well supported, and Mr. Pembroke appeared capable of walking without assistance. Nevertheless, a man who used a stick sufficiently often to carry it on a journey usually reached for it by instinct. I turned to the table. The portfolio occupied its center. Beside it stood a glass of water, filled merely to the brim. A folded napkin rested beneath the glass. The railway timetable that Meredith had retrieved lay at the far edge. You poured this? Mr. Pembroke examined the glass. No. Did you request it? I may have done when I first boarded. Do you remember drinking from it? I do not. The surface of the water trembled continuously with the movement of the train, yet no droplets marked the table around it. The rim showed no clear impression of use. I lifted the glass carefully and examined the napkin beneath. It was dry. Has an attendant entered since dinner? I asked. Not while I was present. One may have entered during your absence. Of course. He watched as I replaced the glass precisely where it had stood. What are you looking for? Evidence of occupation. But I occupied the compartment. For a few minutes. Yes. And before that? Nearly half an hour before dinner.
I looked toward the newspaper. It lay folded upon the table beside the window, its edges aligned with almost unnatural neatness. You read this? Some of it? Which section? The financial pages. I opened the paper. The financial pages remained folded inside. Their outer edges were sharp and undisturbed. Mr. Pembroke leaned nearer. That is curious. You are certain you read them? Quite. Here. Yes. He took the newspaper from me and opened it himself. His expression altered very slightly. I remember reading the closing prices. Could you have read another copy in the dining carriage? No. In the station? I arrived too late to purchase one. He turned several pages. There was an article concerning Northern steel production. I remembered disagreeing with nearly every conclusion. Then perhaps this is not the paper you read. He looked at the masthead. It is today's edition. That does not make it yours. The possibility was perfectly innocent. An attendant might have replaced a discarded newspaper. Another passenger might have left it in the compartment by mistake. Yet its presence contributed to a growing impression. Everything in the room appeared correct in outline. A traveller's stick, a glass of water, a folded newspaper, a portfolio upon the table. The customary objects were present, but they bore remarkably little evidence of having been used. I moved to the luggage rack. A medium-sized leather case rested above the seat. Its straps were fastened. You unpacked anything after boarding? Only the portfolio. No night clothes? Not yet. No wash things? No. The attendant did not prepare your berth? I asked him to wait. I examined the folded bedding stored behind the upper panel. The linen remained tightly pressed, its corners crisp. The room had not been prepared for sleep. That fact alone meant little, since Mr. Pembroke had not intended to retire immediately. But it contradicted the assumptions of those who had knocked and received no answer. Who believed you were asleep? I asked. I cannot say. The steward who brought the message, presumably. Mr. Meredith. He said he thought I had retired. Did you tell him you intended to do so? Mr. Pembroke considered. At dinner I remarked that I was tired. Nothing more definite? No. The answer drew my attention to the shaded lamp. It burned at a comfortable reading strength. I reached beneath the shade and touched the brass fitting. Warm. The lamp had been burning for some time. Did you leave this switched on? I believe so. Why? He frowned. I cannot remember. Would that be your habit? No. He looked around the compartment as though seeing it afresh. I generally extinguish a lamp when leaving a room. Even if you intended to return shortly? Usually. Outside, the wind changed direction as the train crossed an exposed embankment. Rain struck the window more sharply, filling the compartment with a brief, dry rattle before softening again. I lifted the blind fully. The glass was cold. A faint mist clouded its lower corners, but the centre remained clear. Mr. Pembroke joined me. What do you make of that? Very little yet. A man sitting here would surely have clouded the glass. Eventually. Then someone has not been sitting here, not for long. I examined the window latch, the frame, and the narrow sill. All were secure. No draught entered except the ordinary chill conducted through the glass. The condensation was insufficient for a compartment supposedly occupied by a man for a prolonged period with the blind lowered and the lamp burning. Again, there were innocent explanations. The ventilation grill stood open. The door may have been opened more than once. The compartment might simply have retained less warmth than its neighbours. No single observation justified suspicion. Together, however, they produced a curious absence. Not disorder, not intrusion, absence. Mr. Pembroke lowered his voice. You think someone has been here? I think someone wished it to appear that you had been. He stared at me. I raised a hand before he could speak. That is not yet a conclusion, only a possibility. But why? I do not know. I returned to the seat and studied the narrow disturbance in the upholstery near the armrest. It had been produced by a small rectangular object, a book, perhaps, or a case. On the carpet below, almost concealed by the patterned weave, lay a tiny fragment of pale paper. I picked it up. It was no larger than a fingernail and carried part of a printed blue line. Mr. Pembroke bent closer. "Do you recognize it?" "No." Neither did I. I placed it carefully inside my notebook. Then I seated myself and looked once more upon the orderly compartment. The untouched newspaper, the full glass, the folded bedding, the forgotten stick, and the lamp burning warmly over a room which seemed to have been arranged according to an idea of occupation rather than occupied in fact. Mr. Pembroke remained standing beside the table. "What does it mean?" "It means," I said, "that we must be careful not to confuse familiar objects with familiar events." He waited. "This compartment contains everything one would expect to find in a gentleman's room after dinner." I glanced toward the clear center of the window. What it does not yet contain is convincing evidence that the gentleman himself spent any meaningful time here.
Mr. Pembroke regarded the compartment in silence. The train continued northward without concern for our uncertainty. Beneath the carpet, the wheels maintained their steady procession over the rails, while the lumps along the corridor shifted gently with each curve. Beyond the window, the storm had reduced the countryside to an occasional signal light and the fleeting pale shape of rain against glass. "Then where was I?" he asked. "You were with me for much of the time. I mean, before that." "So do I." I closed my notebook. The compartment cannot answer every question. We must now ask those who saw you, or believed they did. Mr. Pembroke glanced towards the corridor. "Where shall we begin?" "With the attendant who brought me to you." We found him at the end of the sleeping car, arranging fresh towels within a narrow service cabinet. He straightened as we approached. "Is anything wrong, sir?" "Nothing that need alarm you," I said. "I should like to clarify the order of events." "Certainly. What is your name?" "William Hale, sir." "Mr. Hale, when did you last see Mr. Pembroke before bringing me to the private saloon?" The attendant looked at Pembroke, then considered carefully. "Before dinner, sir." "Not afterwards?" "I don't believe so." "You were told he had returned to his compartment?" "No, sir. I assumed it." "Why?" "He generally retires early on this journey." "You have attended him before?" "Several times." "Does he ordinarily request that his berth be prepared?" "Yes, sir, usually before dinner." Pembroke frowned. "I did not do so tonight." "No, sir." "Did that strike you as unusual?" "A little, but you said you had business to attend to." "When?" "Shortly after boarding." Mr. Pembroke looked towards me. I remember saying something of the sort. Hale continued to hold the folded towels against his chest, his expression showing the mild anxiety of a conscientious man afraid that some small failure might prove important. "You brought me to the saloon," I said. "Who told you Mr. Pembroke was waiting there?" "Mr. Meredith, sir." The answer came without hesitation. "Where did he speak to you?" "In the vestibule outside the dining carriage." "At approximately what time?" "Perhaps 10 minutes after dinner ended." "Was Mr. Pembroke with him?" "No, sir." Pembroke shifted slightly beside me. "What precisely did Mr. Meredith say?" The attendant thought. "He said Mr. Pembroke had gone ahead and wished the gentleman from the countryside to be brought to him when convenient." "Those were his words?" "As near as I can remember." "You did not verify that Mr. Pembroke was in the saloon?" "No, sir. I had no reason to doubt him." There had been no reason. Meredith was Pembroke's solicitor, known to the railway staff as his travelling companion and adviser. An ordinary instruction, delivered by an ordinary gentleman, required no investigation. "Who unlocked the saloon?" I asked. "It was already unlocked." "And the lamp?" "Burning when I arrived." "Did you see Mr. Pembroke enter it?" "No." Mr. Pembroke spoke quietly. I entered alone. The door stood open. I turned to him. "How long before I arrived?" "Perhaps 5 minutes." "During that interval, did anyone pass?"
I heard footsteps in the corridor. I did not see who made them. I thanked Hale and allowed him to return to his duties. Our next inquiry took us back towards the dining carriage. Most of the tables had been cleared. White cloths remained beneath shaded sconces, their surfaces empty except for a few inverted glasses and a silver bowl of flowers trembling faintly with the motion of the train. The senior steward was checking a written inventory near the service hatch. He introduced himself as Mr. Carter. "I remember Mr. Pembroke leaving," he said. "He was among the first."
Was he alone? Carter shook his head. Mr. Meredith accompanied him. How far? I couldn't say, sir, only that they left the dining car together. Did either gentleman return? Mr. Meredith did. Pembroke looked sharply towards him. When? Only a few minutes later. Was he alone? Yes, sir. What did he do? The steward glanced towards the tables as though the scene might reconstruct itself upon them. He spoke briefly with one of the waiters, then he passed through towards the rear carriages. Did he take anything with him? I don't recall. Think carefully. Carter rested his pencil against the inventory sheet. He may have carried a newspaper. May have. I'm sorry, sir, I noticed something folded beneath his arm, but I cannot swear what it was. The newspaper in Mr. Pembroke's compartment returned to my thoughts. Did you see Mr. Pembroke after he left dinner? No, sir. Did you hear his voice? No. The answer joined the others with quiet precision. Nobody had seen Mr. Pembroke enter his compartment after dinner. Nobody had heard him speaking within it. Nobody had prepared the room for his retirement. Yet several people had behaved as though his presence there were an established fact. We questioned the waiter who had served our table. His recollection proved modest but exact. Mr. Pembroke seemed tired, he said. How did he show it? He spoke less than earlier. Once or twice he closed his eyes while the Colonel was talking. Colonel Ashcombe, had he heard, might have regarded this as insufficient evidence. Did Mr. Pembroke finish his meal? Yes, sir. And his coffee? The waiter hesitated. I couldn't say. You removed the cup? Another waiter cleared that part of the table. Was there anything unusual about it? Not that I noticed. No useful certainty could be extracted from a memory the man did not possess. I thanked him and continued towards the rear of the train. We found Harold Finch in the observation lounge. He sat alone beneath a brass reading lamp, his notebook open upon one knee. Rain streamed across the broad rear window, making the rails behind us appear and disappear in the darkness like two silver threads drawn endlessly from the train. Finch closed his notebook as we entered. Has something happened? We are establishing movements after dinner. His interest brightened, though he made a visible effort to restrain it. What? I saw Colonel Ashcombe in the corridor outside the first-class sleeping car. At what time? Approximately 11. How can you be certain? I had just looked at the lounge clock. Which direction was he travelling? Towards the dining carriage. Did you speak? No. He seemed to be looking for something. Did you see Mr. Pembroke? Finch shook his head. Not after dinner. Did you pass his compartment? Once. What did you observe? The blind was down. Anything else? A light beneath the door. Did you hear movement? He considered. I thought I did. What sort of movement? A slight sound. Perhaps fabric brushing against the door. Perhaps. The young man coloured. It may have been the train. That distinction mattered. What did you conclude at the time? That Mr. Pembroke was inside. Why? Finch glanced from me to the man standing beside me. Because it was his compartment. A reasonable answer. A dangerous one. We left him beside the dark observation window and returned forward. At the connecting vestibule, the train crossed a series of points. The floor shifted beneath us, couplings tightened, and the metallic rhythm broke briefly into a louder succession of blows before settling again. Colonel Ashcombe was in his compartment, polishing a pair of spectacles with a handkerchief. "So Finch saw me," he said when questioned. "The boy has sharper eyes than manners." "You were searching for these?" The Colonel held up the spectacles. "I believed I had left them in the dining car. They were in my coat pocket throughout." "Did you pass Mr. Pembroke's door?" "Twice." "What did you notice?" "Blind lowered, lamp burning." "Did you knock?" "No." "Did you hear anything?" The Colonel frowned. "I saw a shadow beneath the door." "A moving shadow?" "I assumed so." "Did you actually see it move?" He paused. "No." It was the first answer that appeared to trouble him. "The corridor lamps sway," he said at last. "They do. And anyone passing would interrupt the light." "Precisely." He folded the spectacles and placed them upon the table. "Then I cannot claim that the shadow came from within." "No. But I was certain the compartment was occupied." Certainty sometimes describes the strength of an impression rather than the quality of its evidence. The Colonel accepted the observation in silence. Our final inquiry was made of the second attendant, who had knocked upon Mr. Pembroke's door before raising the alarm. He confirmed that the door had been locked. "With the interior bolt?" I asked. "No, sir, the ordinary key lock." "Could it have been locked from the corridor?" "Yes." "By whom?" "Anyone possessing the compartment key, or a railway master key." "How many master keys are aboard?" "The senior attendants each carry one. Inspector Doyle has another." "And Mr. Pembroke's own key?" Pembroke reached into his waistcoat pocket. His fingers emerged empty. He searched the opposite pocket, then his jacket. "I do not appear to have it." "When did you last remember possessing it?" "Before dinner." "Did you lock the compartment then?" "No, I left it open for the attendant." The second attendant looked uneasy. "The key may still be inside, sir." We returned to the compartment. It was not upon the table, beneath the seat, inside the portfolio, or beside the washstand. A methodical search revealed no trace of it. Mr. Pembroke stood near the door while I considered the accumulation of small facts. A room arranged to suggest occupation, a lamp left burning, a blind lowered, a door locked from the corridor, a shadow which no one had truly seen move, sounds which might have belonged to the train, and witnesses who had each observed something genuine before adding, quite innocently, the same unverified conclusion. Mr. Pembroke had been inside, yet he had not. I opened the door and looked along the softly lit corridor. "Someone entered this compartment during your absence," I said. Pembroke's expression tightened. "To search it? Possibly. For the papers? Possibly. But nothing is missing. That we know of." He glanced towards the portfolio. "Then what were they doing?" I looked once more at the carefully positioned walking stick, a pristine newspaper, and the full glass upon its dry napkin. Creating a story. A story, one told without words. Mature male voice, causing the light beneath the shade to travel across the polished table and return. A locked door told the passengers you wished not to be disturbed. A lowered blind told them you had retired. A burning lamp supplied the appearance of wakefulness. Every traveller who passed added the rest for himself. Mr. Pembroke looked slowly about the room. But why persuade everyone I was here when I was elsewhere? That is the question. I stepped into the corridor. Before attempting an answer, it would be necessary to determine how far the deception extended, and whether the person responsible had used the compartment merely to conceal an intrusion or to direct attention away from some other part of the train. The Midnight Express contained more than sleeping rooms and dining tables. There were luggage spaces, service passages, staff compartments, cupboards and vans known to few passengers and noticed by fewer still. For the first time that night, I found myself wondering whether our search had been confined not merely to the wrong room, but to the wrong idea. Whatever had occurred, the answer might still be travelling north with us. The thought remained with me as we proceeded towards the forward end of the sleeping carriage. A railway compartment encourages the illusion of privacy.
Its polished door, lowered blind, and narrow upholstered interior suggests a world complete unto itself. Yet no compartment exists independently aboard a moving train. Behind its walls run pipes, wires, ventilation shafts, and service spaces. Beyond its door lies a corridor used by attendants, passengers, inspectors, and anyone sufficiently familiar with the habits of railway travel. Mr. Pembroke followed beside me. The hour had grown late enough that even the smallest sound appeared distinct. A latch settling within its frame, the faint vibration of glass in a brass fitting, the soft retreat of footsteps several compartments away. Beneath all of them continued the unhurried cadence of the wheels. At the end of the corridor, we found William Hale consulting a small duty ledger beneath the service lamp. "I should like to see the parts of this carriage ordinarily overlooked by passengers," I said. He glanced towards Mr. Pembroke, then back to me. "Certainly, sir, though there is little of interest." "That is often where interest hides." Hale closed the ledger. "Where would you like to begin?" "With every route by which someone might pass Mr. Pembroke's compartment without remaining in the public corridor." The attendant considered. "There is no such route through the sleeping car itself. The compartments are arranged along one side, with the corridor along the other. The exterior wall backs each room. No communicating doors. Not in this carriage. Service panels. Only for plumbing and electrical maintenance, too narrow for a person. Roof access. From outside only, and not while the train is moving." Mr. Pembroke looked towards the rain-darkened window. "No one could have climbed along the exterior." "Not with any likelihood of remaining alive," said Hale. His tone remained professional, but the practical certainty of railwaymen often carries more force than speculation. "Show me the service panels." He unlocked a narrow cupboard set flush within the corridor wall. Behind it lay a collection of stopcocks, insulated wires, and brass fittings labelled in small engraved letters. The space extended scarcely deeper than my forearm. I examined the edges. No fresh scratches marked the frame. Dust lay undisturbed upon the lower ledge. Whatever purpose the cupboard served, concealment was not among them. The next panel contained spare bulbs and cleaning cloths. Another concealed the mechanism operating the compartment heating. All were ordinary. All were too small. We moved into the connecting vestibule. Here the sound of the train altered at once. The carpet ended. Metal plates replaced polished wood beneath our feet, and the wheels spoke more directly through the structure of the carriage. Wind pressed softly against the outer doors. At intervals, rain struck the small windows with a sharper, more brittle sound. Hale indicated the door on our left. Emergency exit. It remained secured by a brass latch and an additional railway lock. "Has it been opened tonight?" "No, sir." "How can you tell?" He pointed to a narrow strip of red paper pasted across the join between door and frame. It bore the railway crest and the date. The seal is checked before departure. If the door opens, the paper tears. The strip remained intact. The opposite exit carried an identical seal. I pressed one gloved finger lightly against the paper. It was dry and firmly attached. "No one left the train here," said Pembroke. "Not through either door." We crossed into the adjoining carriage. This was the first-class sleeping car in which several of our fellow passengers had taken compartments. Its corridor resembled our own, though the upholstery was darker and the lamps more widely spaced. A single attendant stood near the center, speaking quietly with an elderly passenger who wished to know whether the storm had delayed the train. "Only a few minutes, madam," he assured her. "Nothing to trouble you." When she had retired, Hale introduced us. The attendant's name was Briggs. At my request, he produced the carriage plan kept inside his duty cabinet. It showed each compartment, lavatory, service recess, and vestibule in precise black lines. "Have you noticed anyone passing repeatedly between the carriages?" I asked. "Several passengers have walked about, sir." "Anyone whose movements seemed unnecessary?" Briggs reflected. The young journalist came through twice. Mr. Finch, yes, once towards the front, once towards the rear. At what times? Before 11, I should say. Anyone else? Colonel Ashcombe passed while searching for his spectacles. We know of that. Inspector Doyle conducted his routine check. When? Perhaps 20 minutes after dinner. Did he enter any compartments? Only those reported defective. Were any defective? Number 7 had a sticking window latch. Number 2 complained of insufficient heat. Did either complaint concern Mr. Pembroke's carriage? No, sir. Mr. Meredith? Briggs nodded. He came through once. In which direction? Towards the rear. Did he return? I believe so, though I cannot give the exact time. Was he carrying anything? The attendant's brow furrowed. A folded newspaper, perhaps. The second uncertain recollection of a newspaper deserved notation, though not conclusion. Did he stop anywhere? Not that I saw. Hale showed us the lavatory at the end of the carriage. It offered no concealment beyond a shallow cabinet beneath the basin. The window opened only a few inches along its upper edge. Rain had gathered upon the outside of the glass, but the interior sill remained dry. The adjoining linen press was larger. When Hale unlocked it, shelves of folded sheets and towels filled the space from floor to ceiling. Fresh soap and sealed bottles of disinfectant occupied the lowest compartment. Has anything been removed? Only what has been issued during the evening. Could a man conceal himself here? Not without emptying half the cupboard. I examined the stacks. Their folds were exact. Dust had gathered faintly upon the upper frame. Nothing indicated recent disturbance. Pembroke watched me with increasing perplexity. You believe someone may have hidden in the train? I believe we should establish where someone could have hidden before deciding whether anyone did. We continued towards the dining carriage. Its warmth met us before we entered. Though dinner service had ended, the air still carried traces of coffee, extinguished candles, and polished silver. A steward moved among the tables, replacing salt cellars and straightening chairs for the morning service. Behind the public saloon lay a narrow service corridor. Passengers ordinarily saw little of it. Swinging doors concealed the pantry, plate cupboards, and the passage leading towards the kitchen car. Here the surroundings became practical rather than elegant. The walls were painted cream. Copper pipes ran near the ceiling. The floor was covered in ribbed rubber, designed to provide footing during sudden movement. The vibration of the train rose strongly through my shoes. Mr. Carter, the senior steward, joined us. "Is there some difficulty, sir? We are learning the train. At this hour, the train is unlikely to simplify itself by morning." Carter regarded me for a moment, uncertain whether I had made a joke, then decided that I probably had not. He opened the pantry cupboards in turn. Crockery, silverware, tea canisters, table linen, nothing large enough to contain a person. The kitchen itself was still occupied. 2 cooks prepared stock for breakfast, while a junior steward scrubbed a copper pan. Every surface appeared in active use, and every member of staff could account for the others during the relevant period. Beyond the kitchen lay another vestibule, then the luggage van. Inspector Doyle met us at its entrance. He had removed his cap and carried a small inspection lantern in one hand. "I hear you've begun examining the train." News travels quickly aboard enclosed vehicles. Quicker than the train itself on some branch lines. His expression remained practical. "What are you looking for?" "At present, possibilities. That can become a lengthy search. We have several hours." He unlocked the luggage van door. The air changed immediately. Here the agreeable fragrances of food, beeswax, and warm upholstery gave way to leather, damp canvas, rope, engine oil, and cold metal. Trunks and cases stood secured behind webbing straps. Hat boxes occupied a high rack. Several commercial samples had been fastened to the floor. A caged electric lamp swung gently overhead. The luggage van possessed no exterior corridor. Anyone entering had to pass through the doors at either end, both visible from the attendant stations during ordinary service. "Has anything been moved since departure?" I asked. Doyle consulted a manifest clipped beside the door. 2 cases were retrieved at the first scheduled stop, nothing else. Any unregistered luggage? None. Could someone enter from outside? Not while we're traveling. The roof? There is a hatch for maintenance, bolted internally. He raised the lantern. The hatch showed no signs of disturbance. A film of dust lay across the bolt, broken only where Doyle had tested it during his inspection. We walked slowly between the rows of luggage. Several trunks were large enough to conceal a man, but each bore seals or straps. Doyle identified their owners and confirmed that none had been opened aboard. At the far end stood a partition separating the luggage van from a narrow service passage. "What lies beyond that?" I asked. "The linen and stores section." Hale looked towards Doyle. Wasn't part of it cleared before departure? The inspector nodded. Yes, we had water enter through a damaged roof vent earlier this afternoon. Several bundles were removed and sent to the depot laundry. The remark might have passed as an ordinary piece of railway inconvenience. Instead, it returned to me with the faint familiarity of something heard before. Mr. Pembroke had mentioned a conversation before dinner. A flooded carriage, linen moved elsewhere, one of the service cupboards emptied. "May we see it?" I asked. Doyle led us through the partition. The service passage was narrow enough that we proceeded in single file. Pipes ran along one wall. On the other stood several cupboard doors fitted with recessed brass handles. The first contained blankets. The second held bottled water, candles, spare lamp glasses and cleaning supplies. The third was locked. Doyle inserted his master key. The lock resisted.
He tried again, applying greater pressure. "Stiff from disuse," he said. At last the mechanism yielded with a dull click. The door opened only a few inches before meeting an obstruction within. Hale leaned nearer. Something has fallen against it. Doyle placed his shoulder carefully to the panel. The obstruction shifted with a soft scraping sound. The door opened wider. Inside stood several empty wooden racks and 2 rolled carpets secured with cord. A large folded tarpaulin had slipped from the upper shelf and fallen against the door. The inspector lifted it aside. The cupboard was deeper than the others. Deep enough, I judged, for a man to stand within if the racks were empty. Mr. Pembroke seemed to reach the same conclusion. Could someone have concealed himself there? "For a short time," said Doyle, "though I cannot imagine why." I raised the inspector's lantern and examined the interior. The floor showed scuff marks from years of boxes and linen bundles. Damp had darkened one corner where water had entered during the afternoon. A faint smell of wet canvas lingered within. Nothing immediately suggested recent occupation. No discarded article. No footprint sufficiently clear to identify. No damage. I ran one finger along the edge of the lowest wooden rack. Dust coated the upper surface, but had been disturbed near the door. "Who knew this cupboard had been emptied?" I asked. "Railway staff," said Doyle. "Only railway staff?" He considered. The removal took place while passengers were boarding. Anyone nearby might have heard us discussing it. Hale nodded. I mentioned it to a gentleman before departure. "Which gentleman?" The attendant's face tightened as he searched his memory. "I'm not certain." "Try." He asked why several bundles of linen were being taken along the platform. I explained there'd be water damage. "Could you identify him?" "I might if I saw him." "Was he elderly?" "No, sir." "Young?" "Middle-aged, I should say. Well-spoken." The description applied to more than one man aboard. I stepped farther into the cupboard. The ceiling was low. The constant vibration of the train felt stronger here, travelling through the metal wall and into the wooden racks. From somewhere beyond came the muffled clank of couplings and the deep, periodic breathing of the locomotive. I turned slowly. The cupboard provided concealment, but concealment alone explained nothing. A man hidden here would still need a reason to enter, a reason to leave,
and an opportunity to do both without attracting notice. Near the back wall, the dust on the floor had been disturbed by a broad, irregular smear. It might have been caused when the rolled carpets were moved. It might have been left by the tarpaulin falling. Its edges were too indistinct to support any stronger claim. I crouched and examined it beneath the lantern. No clear print appeared, only a shallow line running towards the door. "Have these carpets been moved tonight?" I asked. Doyle shook his head. "Not to my knowledge. The tarpaulin. It may have fallen with the motion of the train. May have. I didn't inspect this cupboard after departure." I stood. Mr. Pembroke remained at the threshold. "Have you found something?" "A space.
Nothing more. Spaces are facts. Their use is interpretation." Doyle closed the cupboard once we had withdrawn, though the lock continued to resist before turning. We completed our examination of the remaining service compartments. The staff carriage offered little privacy. 2 attendants rested in narrow bunks, while a third completed paperwork at a small desk. The brake van contained tools, signal lamps, flags, and the guards' equipment. Its exterior doors bore intact seals. The mail and luggage sections farther forward remained under continuous supervision. By the time we returned to the first-class sleeping car, the train had begun climbing a long gradient. The engine's labor reached us only faintly, but the rhythm beneath the floor had slowed and deepened. Rain still covered the windows, though the violence of the wind had lessened. Mr. Pembroke walked beside me without speaking. At last he said, "We have searched every reasonable place." "Not every place." "What remains?" "People." He looked towards me. "We have tested the train's structure. Doors, windows, cupboards, passages, luggage spaces, and found nothing. We found that the obvious exits were secured. We found that certain overlooked spaces existed. We found that knowledge of at least one such space was not confined entirely to railway employees. But none of that explains my compartment. No. Nor why someone wished others to believe I occupied it. No. His frustration remained controlled, but I heard it beneath the words. What then have we gained? Limits. The answer surprised him. A useful investigation does not merely discover what happened, it removes what could not have happened. We stopped outside his compartment. The blind remained lowered. The lamp still burned within. Seen from the corridor, the room offered precisely the same quiet suggestion of occupancy as before. A passenger approaching from the far end would have drawn the obvious conclusion. Mr. Pembroke was inside, yet he stood beside me. I looked at the thin line of light beneath the door. "Our difficulty is no longer the arrangement of the carriage," I said. "What is it?" "The arrangement of the witnesses." He waited. "Every physical feature of your compartment encouraged the same belief. But objects do not create chronology on their own. People do that. They see a lamp, remember a remark, hear an uncertain sound, and place those fragments into an order that seems natural. I opened the door. The room remained untouched since our examination. We have been asking how someone entered this compartment and what they did here. Mr. Pembroke followed me inside. Those seem reasonable questions. They are. I looked towards the portfolio, the walking stick, the unused newspaper, and the clear center of the window. But there is another. He closed the door behind us. Which is? I turned to him. At what point did everyone aboard this train become convinced you had returned here after dinner? The carriage swayed gently as the line curved through the darkness. Mr. Pembroke considered the question. I cannot say. Neither can I. Outside, a signal lamp flashed red across the rain-streaked window, filling the compartment for one brief instant before darkness reclaimed the glass. Until we can, I said, we do not possess a timeline. We possessed only a collection of assumptions traveling in the same direction. The collection of assumptions seemed almost to acquire a rhythm of its own. The lamp meant wakefulness. The blind meant privacy.
The locked door meant occupation. Each conclusion had followed so naturally from the one before it that no passenger had felt the need to examine the foundation beneath them. Outside the compartment, the Midnight Express passed across a bridge. The sound of the wheels changed from their muted cadence to a deeper, hollow resonance. For several moments, the carriage appeared suspended above the darkness, accompanied only by the rain upon the roof and the measured thunder of the train crossing ironwork. Then the embankment returned beneath us, and the familiar rhythm resumed. Mr. Pembroke remained beside the table. How do we determine when the assumption began? By removing every statement that contains interpretation. Leaving what? Only what someone saw, heard, or did. I opened my notebook upon the table. We shall begin with dinner. He sat opposite me. You were there yourself. I was. Then you know as much as anyone. I know what I noticed. That is not always the same thing. The distinction appeared to trouble him, though he made no objection. I drew a line down the center of a blank page. On the left, I wrote asterisk asterisk observed asterisk asterisk. On the right, asterisk asterisk concluded. At approximately 20 minutes past 10, I said, we were seated in the dining carriage. Mr. Pembroke nodded. Colonel Ashcombe sat opposite Mr. Finch. Mr. Meredith was beside you. I was near the end of the table. Yes. Coffee arrived after dessert. It did. I looked at him. Did you drink yours? His answer did not come immediately. I believe so. That is a conclusion. He frowned. I remember the cup. So do I. I wrote beneath the first heading, asterisk asterisk, a cup of coffee stood before Mr. Pembroke, asterisk asterisk. Do you remember lifting it? He closed his eyes briefly. No. Do you remember its taste? No. Was it black? I generally take coffee black. That was not my question. A faint expression of irritation appeared and vanished. I cannot remember. What is the last thing at dinner you recall clearly? He considered with care. The Colonel was speaking about military transport. Before coffee. I think so. Mr. Finch asked whether railway organization had changed greatly since the war. Yes, I remember that. Then. Meredith said something. What? Mr. Pembroke looked towards the window. I cannot recall. I allowed the silence to remain undisturbed. Beyond the lowered blind, rain passed over the glass in a constant soft rush. After that, he said at last, I remember standing. In the dining carriage? Yes. Anything between the conversation and standing? No. The missing interval might have amounted to no more than a minute or two. Fatigue, distraction, and the ordinary diffusion of memory could account for it. Yet his uncertainty began precisely where the coffee service had begun. How did you feel when you rose? Tired. You had seemed tired before then, so I was told. Did you feel unsteady? Only briefly. Who assisted you? No one. Are you certain? He pressed his fingers lightly against his forehead. Meredith placed a hand beneath my elbow. The recollection arrived slowly. For how long? Only while I stepped into the corridor. Did anyone else see this? The Colonel may have done. I closed the notebook. We shall ask him. Colonel Ashcombe had not yet retired. We found him seated upright in his compartment, reading beneath a shaded lamp. His collar had been loosened by the smallest degree compatible with military dignity. He laid the book aside as we entered. More chronology, only dinner. A campaign is often won or lost by the order in which things occurred. So is a railway mystery. He indicated the empty seats. What do you require? Describe Mr. Pembroke's departure from the dining carriage. The Colonel looked towards him. You rose before the rest of us. Was I alone? No, Meredith accompanied you. Why? You appeared unwell. Mr. Pembroke's face altered. Unwell? Not gravely. You swayed when you stood. Did I say anything? You apologized. For what? For being overtired. The Colonel folded his hands over one knee. Meredith suggested you ought to lie down. Did I agree? You said you wished first to attend to some business. What business? You did not specify. I asked, did Mr. Pembroke walk without assistance? For the first few steps, at the doorway, Meredith steadied him. Did you see them after they entered the corridor? No. Did either return? Meredith did. When? Within a few minutes. How many? The Colonel's gaze sharpened. 3, perhaps 4. What did he say? He remarked that Pembroke had gone to attend to his private matter. Those words? Something very close. Did he say Mr. Pembroke had returned to his compartment? Colonel Ashcombe considered. No. Did you assume it? I assumed he had gone wherever his business required. Later, when you passed the light beneath his compartment door, did you remember Meredith's remark? Naturally. And conclude Mr. Pembroke had retired? The Colonel's expression became grave. I see your meaning. He had not been told that Pembroke occupied the compartment. He had supplied that part himself. We thanked him and continued to the observation lounge, where Finch remained with his notebook and an untouched cup of tea. He greeted our arrival with poorly concealed anticipation. I have written down everything I remember. Then let us hope memory preceded writing. His expression became suitably chastened. I asked him to describe the coffee service without consulting his notes. The stewards brought the pots from the pantry. Mr. Meredith poured for Mr. Pembroke. Not the waiter? Finch shook his head. The waiter was called away. Mr. Meredith already had the pot in his hand, so he filled both cups. Mr. Pembroke turned towards me. Are you certain? I noticed because the pot was silver and rather heavy. He nearly struck the edge of the sugar bowl. What did he put into my cup? Coffee. Anything else? Finch hesitated. I cannot say. Did Mr. Pembroke drink? I saw him raise the cup. The first direct observation. Once? At least once. Did you see him swallow? The young man blinked. No. Why not? I was speaking to the Colonel. Then you saw the cup rise. Yes. And later assumed its contents had been drunk. His enthusiasm diminished. I suppose I did. How did Mr. Pembroke behave afterwards? He grew quiet. Was that unusual? I had only just met him. Did anyone comment upon it? Mr. Meredith did. What did he say? Finch opened his notebook. This time I allowed him to consult it. He said, Arthur has been sleeping poorly for several nights. Mr. Pembroke looked up sharply. I had said nothing of the kind. To Mr. Meredith. To anyone. The words did not establish dishonesty. A trusted solicitor of 20 years might know of sleeplessness without having been told that evening. Still, the statement had provided an explanation before anyone had requested one. Pembroke was tired because Pembroke had slept badly. Once offered, the explanation required no further thought. What happened when Mr. Pembroke left? I asked. Mr. Meredith went with him. And returned? Yes. Did you ask where Mr. Pembroke had gone? No. Did anyone? Finch searched his memory.
The waiter asked whether Mr. Pembroke wished his coffee sent after him. What did Meredith reply? The young journalist read another line. He said, No, Mr. Pembroke will not require anything further tonight. The sentence rested quietly between us. It was not remarkable. A wary gentleman leaving dinner early would require nothing further. A close adviser might answer naturally on his behalf. Yet it was the first moment at which another person had spoken as though Mr. Pembroke's movements and intentions were already known. Did Meredith say he had retired? I asked. No. That he had entered his compartment? No. That he intended to sleep? No. Finch closed the notebook. But that is what we all understood. Yes. The false timeline had not begun with the locked door. It had begun at the dining table. We returned to the service passage and found the waiter who had attended our party completing the final polishing of the coffee pots. Under the brighter pantry lamps, their silver surfaces reflected the shelves and hanging cups in curved fragments. You were called away during service, I said. Yes, sir. A passenger at the next table had spilt cream. Who held the coffee pot when you left? The waiter glanced towards the row of polished vessels. Mr. Meredith, sir. Had he requested it? He offered to pass it along. When you returned, where was it? On the service table. Were all cups filled? I believe so. Did you remove Mr. Pembroke's cup? No, sir. Another steward cleared the table later. Who? The man named a junior waiter whom we had questioned earlier. We found him in the kitchen car stacking saucers. Mr. Pembroke's cup, he recalled, had contained coffee when removed. How much? More than half, sir. Could you identify the cup? Not now. They've all been washed. Was that unusual? Many passengers leave coffee. Did anything else remain upon the table? A little sugar upon one saucer. Whose? I couldn't say. Mr. Pembroke took his coffee without sugar. Meredith, I remembered, used 2 spoonfuls. The observation led nowhere by itself. Cups and saucers were readily misplaced during clearing, particularly aboard a moving train. I returned to the senior steward. Mr. Carter produced the dining car clock record, a simple sheet upon which service times were marked for the staff. Dessert cleared 10:37. Toffee served 10:41. Mr. Pembroke left approximately 10:47. Mr. Meredith returned approximately 10:52. Attendant Hale received Meredith's instruction near the vestibule shortly before 10:55. Pembroke entered the private saloon, by his own recollection, at approximately the same time. I arranged the facts in order. At 10:41, a cup of coffee was placed before him. Within 6 minutes, he had become sufficiently unsteady for Meredith to support his arm. Meredith accompanied him from the dining carriage. Within 5 minutes, Meredith returned alone and told the others, by implication rather than statement, that Pembroke required nothing further. Shortly afterwards, he instructed Hale that Pembroke had gone ahead to the saloon. Yet Pembroke remembered entering his own compartment before seeking the attendant. I looked towards him. When you left dinner, did you go directly to your compartment? Yes. Alone? He began to answer, then stopped. I thought so. Do you remember Meredith leaving you? No. Do you remember opening your compartment door? A longer silence followed. I remember being inside. That is different. He looked unsettled. I reviewed the letter. The pencil marks prove someone reviewed it, not when. They are mine. I do not dispute that. The shaded country lamps swayed as the train took another curve. Crockery touched softly within the cupboards, a brief, delicate trembling that ceased when the line straightened. The significant inconsistency was not that witnesses disagreed over an hour. It concerned 5 minutes. 5 minutes during which Mr. Pembroke's memory was uncertain. Meredith's movements were only partially observed, and the entire later chronology had quietly taken shape. We returned to the private saloon where Mr. Pembroke and I had first spoken. The cup I remembered seeing upon the table had long since been removed. The correspondence remained, though the room had been tidied since our conversation. You were here when I arrived, I said. Certainly. You spoke clearly. You appeared tired but not confused. I remember our conversation. So do I. Then I was awake after dinner. Yes. The fact was undeniable. The question was what had happened before our meeting and why every person aboard had afterwards been encouraged to place you somewhere else. I opened my notebook again. The left-hand column now contained facts. Coffee served, cup raised, Pembroke unsteady. Meredith assisted him into the corridor. Meredith returned alone. Meredith explained the fatigue. Meredith declined further service on Pembroke's behalf. Meredith told Hale that Pembroke waited in the saloon. None proved wrongdoing. Together, they revealed influence. One man had stood at every point where uncertainty became explanation. Mr. Pembroke read the entries over my shoulder. You believe Meredith constructed the timeline. I believe he helped others construct it. That is not the same accusation. No, I closed the notebook, nor should it be. Trust accumulated across 20 years ought not to be overturned by 6 uncertain minutes. But neither could it be permitted to replace them. Mr. Pembroke stared towards the dark window. Who benefited from everyone believing I had retired? The person who required your movements to go unquestioned. And who was that?
I looked back towards the corridor leading from the dining car to the sleeping compartments, the private saloon, and the service passages beyond. That is what the missing 5 minutes must tell us.
The missing 5 minutes had carried us beyond the dining carriage, yet every account of them ended at its doorway. I stood for a moment in the private saloon, listening to the softened beat of the wheels beneath the carpet. The train had begun descending from the long gradient. Its pace increased almost imperceptibly, and with it came a lighter cadence from the rails, swift and regular, while rain whispered against the window rather than striking it. Mr. Pembroke remained beside the table. "What do you propose?" "To walk the 5 minutes. We have already examined the route. We examined the train. Now we shall examine the journey." We returned to the dining carriage. The lamps had been lowered since our earlier visit. Empty tables stood in orderly rows beneath their white cloths, while the silver fittings along the walls caught the remaining light in narrow, muted gleams. At the far end, a steward completed his final inspection before withdrawing through the pantry doors. I asked Mr. Pembroke to take his former place. He sat. Coffee had been served. "Yes." You rose. "With Meredith's assistance." "Show me." He placed one hand upon the table and pushed himself upright. The train swayed gently beneath him. His balance remained firm. "I was less steady then," he said. "Which arm did Meredith hold?" Pembroke thought before touching his left elbow. "This one." "Where was he seated?" "On my left." That agreed with my own recollection. We crossed the carriage at an ordinary pace. 11 seconds brought us to the door. Beyond it lay the short vestibule connecting the dining car with the sleeping carriage. Mr. Pembroke stopped. I remember the sound becoming louder here. The floor was metal rather than carpeted. The wheels spoke plainly through it, and the couplings gave a soft complaint as the train rounded a curve. What else? Meredith said I required air. Did he open an exterior door? No. A window? Pembroke looked towards the narrow pane in the vestibule door. I cannot remember. I tried the upper ventilator. It opened inward by several inches, admitting a thread of cold air scented with rain and coal smoke. Mr. Pembroke watched the movement. "Yes," he said slowly, "that was open. Before you arrived, I believe Meredith opened it." "How long did you remain here?" "I don't know." We continued into the sleeping carriage. From the vestibule, Mr. Pembroke's compartment lay to the right. The private saloon lay beyond it and around the slight bend near the carriage junction. "Which direction did you turn?" I asked. "Towards my compartment." He took 2 steps, then stopped. "No." "No." He looked back towards the vestibule. "I intended to turn this way." "That is not the same thing." He closed his eyes. "The corridor lamp was out." I said nothing. His gaze rose to the cream glass fitting above us. It now burned steadily, casting its warm circle across the polished paneling. "Are you certain?" The corridor was dark for a moment. "How dark?" "Not entirely. Light came through the glass in the carriage doors." "Could you see Meredith?" "Only his outline." A corridor lamp had briefly extinguished earlier in the evening. The detail had been recorded as an ordinary defect and subsequently dismissed. Inspector Doyle had described it during his inspection, though no witness had connected it precisely with Pembroke's departure from dinner. Then what happened? Meredith told me to wait. His exact words? Pembroke pressed one hand against the brass rail. Something like, "Steady, Arthur, the lamp has failed." And after that? I remember leaning against the wall. Here? He looked along the corridor. No, farther on. We walked slowly. At the first compartment he shook his head. At the second he paused. The polished panel beside its door bore no distinguishing feature beyond a narrow brass strip and the call button used to summon an attendant. Mr. Pembroke placed his palm against the wood. "This feels familiar." "Because you remember touching it?" "Perhaps. Or because every panel is alike." He withdrew his hand. "I cannot be sure." We continued. Near the bend of the corridor stood the shallow recess containing a folding attendant seat. Opposite it, a service door opened upon the narrow passage leading towards the linen and stores cupboards.
Pembroke stopped again. The smell. What smell? Damp cloth. It was faint, yet unmistakable once noticed. The emptied cupboard farther forward still retained the odour of wet canvas and linen affected by the afternoon's leak. You remember it? Yes. The answer came more firmly than those before it. I thought someone had left a wet overcoat nearby. Did Meredith bring you through this door? I don't know. I opened it. The service passage beyond was unlit except for a weak lamp at the far end. Pipes ran along one wall. Cupboard doors occupied the other. The vibration of the train travelled more sharply through the uncarpeted floor. Mr. Pembroke remained at the threshold. I have never seen this passage. Not consciously. He looked at me. You think Meredith brought me here? I think something in it has awakened a memory. That was all the evidence permitted. We found Inspector Doyle in the next carriage and asked when the corridor lamp had failed. He produced his duty ledger. At 10:48, he said. Briggs reported it while I was checking the heating in number 2. How long was it extinguished? 3 or 4 minutes. Why? Loose contact in the fitting, the movement of the carriage caused it. Who repaired it? I did. At what time? 10:52. The 5 missing minutes now possessed boundaries. Pembroke left the dining carriage at approximately 10:47. The corridor lamp failed at 10:48. It was restored at 10:52. Meredith returned to the dining car during that interval. Pembroke appeared in the private saloon shortly afterwards. What did you see when you came to repair it? I asked. Doyle considered. The corridor was empty, entirely. I passed one passenger near the saloon. Who? A lady. Mrs. Marsh? I believe so. Evelyn Marsh occupied a compartment in the adjoining sleeping car. Until then, she had entered the investigation only through an earlier disagreement with Pembroke concerning a theatrical investment. Her movements after dinner had seemed irrelevant. We found her awake. She sat before the mirror in her compartment, removing a pair of earrings. A silk dressing gown lay over her evening dress, and a small book rested unopened beside the lamp. Inspector Doyle recalls passing you shortly before 11, I said. That is quite possible. Where were you going? To the dining carriage. Why? I had left my gloves. Did you find them? No, they were beneath my own coat. She smiled faintly. I possess an unfortunate talent for searching everywhere except the correct place. Did you pass this service door? Yes. Was it open? Her hand paused upon the second earring. I believe it was. Did you see anyone? No. Hear anyone? She looked towards Mr. Pembroke with growing attention. I heard a man speaking. What did he say? I cannot remember the exact words. Try. She laid the earring upon the dressing table. The voice was low, reassuring. Could you identify it? I thought it belonged to Mr. Meredith. Pembroke remained silent. What did you hear? I asked again. Mrs. Marsh closed her eyes briefly. Something about sitting down. Anything else? She shook her head, then stopped. Yes, her expression changed. He said, it will pass in a moment. The words were entirely consistent with one friend assisting another through a spell of faintness. They were also the first evidence placing Meredith with Pembroke after both men had vanished from the view of the dining carriage. Did you hear Mr. Pembroke answer? No. Any movement? A soft scraping sound. From the corridor? From behind the service door. I thanked her. Back in the passage, Inspector Doyle unlocked the cupboards one by one. Blankets, bottled water, cleaning materials. At the deepest cupboard, the lock resisted as before. When the door opened, damp air emerged from within. The folded tarpaulin had been replaced upon the upper shelf. Rolled carpets stood against the rear wall. The wooden racks remained largely empty where the damaged linen had been removed. Mr. Pembroke stared into the space. I remember sitting. Doyle raised his lantern. Inside here? I don't know. Pembroke stepped across the threshold. The compartment was deep enough to contain a seated man without his being visible from the service passage. Against the lower wall stood an empty wooden packing case, its top level with the height of a low stool. He touched it, then withdrew his hand sharply. This? What about it? I sat upon something hard.
His breathing remained controlled, though the colour had left his face. Meredith was beside me. He loosened my collar. And then, nothing. The train passed over another set of points. The lantern trembled in Doyle's hand, throwing brief shadows across the racks and the damp metal wall. I crouched beside the packing case. Its lid bore a shallow impression in the dust where someone had rested a hand. Near one corner lay a dark thread caught beneath a splinter. I lifted it carefully. Fine wool, charcoal grey. Mr. Pembroke's dinner jacket was black. Meredith's had been grey. The thread proved presence, not purpose. It could have been transferred earlier. It could have come from any traveller wearing similar cloth. Yet the sequence had altered materially. Mr. Pembroke had not walked unassisted from dinner to his compartment. He had been brought into a service passage during the precise interval in which the corridor lamp was extinguished. Mrs. Marsh had heard Meredith reassure someone behind the door. Pembroke remembered damp cloth, a hard seat, and Meredith loosening his collar. The missing 5 minutes were no longer empty. They had a location. I stood and looked towards the narrow passage outside. "What happened here?" Pembroke asked. "I cannot yet tell you. But I lost consciousness? Possibly. And Meredith concealed it? That is more certain. Why? I placed the grey thread inside my notebook, because when he returned to dinner, he did not say you had collapsed in a railway cupboard. The lantern light rested upon Pembroke's troubled face. He told everyone you had gone to attend to private business. I turned towards the dark mouth of the service passage. The first deception was not your supposedly occupied compartment. A cupboard door clicked softly somewhere behind us as the train swayed. It was the account of how you reached the saloon. The cupboard seemed to retain the silence of what had occurred within it. Behind its metal walls, the pulse of the train sounded deeper than in the passenger carriages. Wheels passed over the rail joints in swift succession. The wooden racks trembled faintly. Somewhere beyond the service passage, a coupling tightened with a dull iron knock and relaxed again. Mr. Pembroke stood beside the packing case, one hand resting upon the open collar of his shirt. "I remember very little," he said. "Do not force it. But something happened here." "Yes. And Meredith concealed it. He concealed your collapse. We do not yet know what else he concealed." Inspector Doyle raised his lantern towards the upper shelves. Its light travelled across the folded tarpaulin, the dampened wall, and the empty spaces where linen had once been stored. "What are we searching for now?" he asked. "The point at which Mr. Pembroke left this cupboard." Doyle glanced towards him. Surely he walked out. Perhaps. I turned to Pembroke. "What is your first clear recollection after sitting upon the case?" "Being in the private saloon." "Already seated?" "Yes." "Was anyone with you?" "No." "Was the door open?" He hesitated. "I think it was." "What lay upon the table?" "My papers, the cigarette case, coffee." "The coffee you had brought from dinner?" "No, a different cup." I remembered it clearly, half finished, standing beside the correspondence when I first entered the saloon. "Did you drink it?" "A little." "Who provided it?" I assumed an attendant had done so. Assumption again. I asked Doyle to send for William Hale. While we waited, I examined the packing case more closely. It was not railway property. Faded lettering upon one side identified a London stationer, and several torn labels showed that it had been used repeatedly for ordinary supplies. The lid was secured by 2 small brass hinges. No lock had been fitted. I lifted it. Inside lay bundles of blank dining car menus, obsolete timetables, and several packets of railway stationery. Nothing appeared concealed beneath them. Doyle watched me replace the contents. Could the grey thread have come from a royal uniform? Possibly. Then it proves very little. By itself. Hale arrived within minutes. "You wished to see me, sir?" "When you brought me to the private saloon, did you carry coffee?" "No, sir." "Had you placed any there earlier?" "No." "Who uses that saloon?" "It is reserved when required. Tonight, Mr. Pembroke requested it." "When?" "Before departure." "Did he ask for coffee?" Hale looked towards Pembroke. "No, sir." "Did anyone else enter before I arrived?" "Mr. Meredith." Pembroke became very still. "You saw him?" "Yes, sir. He came from the saloon as I approached through the next carriage." "Was Mr. Pembroke inside then?" "I did not see him." "What did Meredith carry?" "A cup and saucer." "Entering or leaving?" "Leaving, sir." The attendant's answer settled one uncertainty while creating another. "When was this?" "Only a minute or two before I found you." "You told us earlier that Meredith instructed you near the dining carriage." "He did. I continued towards the saloon, but another passenger stopped me to ask about a blanket. By the time I arrived, Mr. Meredith was coming out." "Did he speak?" "He said Mr. Pembroke was ready to receive his visitor." "And the cup?" Hale frowned. "I assumed he had brought it from the saloon because Mr. Pembroke did not want it." "Was it empty?" "I couldn't see." "Did you notice anything else?" The attendant considered. He carried a folded newspaper beneath his arm. The newspaper had now appeared in 3 independent recollections. Mr. Carter had seen Meredith carry one after returning to the dining carriage. Briggs had seen him with one while passing through the sleeping car. Hale had seen one beneath his arm as he left the private saloon. Yet the newspaper later discovered in Pembroke's compartment had not been read by Pembroke at all. I thanked Hale and asked Doyle to accompany us back. The compartment remained as we had left it. Its staged objects waited beneath the warm lamp with almost reproachful neatness. I opened the newspaper upon the table. It was complete except for a narrow strip torn from the lower margin of the financial page. The missing portion had not been obvious while the paper remained folded. From my notebook I removed the pale fragment found beside the seat. It carried part of a blue printed rule. The coloring matched the financial tables. I placed the fragment against the torn edge. It fitted. Pembroke leaned over the table. Then the paper was opened in here. At least one page was torn here, or the fragment was carried here with it. For what purpose? I examined the column from which the strip had been removed. Most of the missing text concerned share quotations. At the end, however, a small printed notice remained partly visible. It referred to Pembroke Engineering. The company was expected to announce a major internal reorganization following completion of its northern negotiations. "Did you know this notice would appear?" I asked. "Yes." "Who else?" "The board, Meredith, several senior officers." "Would it affect the value of the company?" "Possibly, though not greatly." "Could it affect someone who had speculated upon the announcement?" Pembroke's expression hardened. "It might." He opened the leather portfolio and searched through its compartments. "What is it?" I asked. "A memorandum." "Concerning the reorganization?" "No, concerning irregular payments." He removed several letters, then examined the empty pocket again. "It was here." "When did you last see it?" "Before dinner." "Did you show it to anyone?" "Meredith knew I possessed it." The room grew quiet except for the rain brushing softly across the window. What did the memorandum contain? A summary prepared by my chief accountant. Funds had been transferred through several subsidiary accounts without authority. By whom? It did not name the responsible person conclusively. But you had formed an opinion. Yes. Meredith. Pembroke lowered himself into the seat. I intended to ask for his explanation before taking the matter to the board. During this journey? That was the private conversation I meant to conduct after dinner. The phrase returned to its proper place. Pembroke had told Colonel Ashcombe that he had business to attend to. Meredith had accompanied him from the table. The meeting had not been invented. Only its location and its conclusion had been concealed. "Did the memorandum include account numbers?" I asked. "And dates, enough to enable an investigator to trace the money?" "Could it be reproduced?" "Certainly. The accountant retained his records." "Then stealing it would delay an inquiry, not prevent one?" "Yes." "A desperate man, however, may value delay more highly than safety." I considered the remaining suspects. Colonel Ashcombe had crossed the corridor while looking for spectacles that were already in his pocket. His movements had appeared suspicious only because he passed the staged compartment.
Nothing connected him with Pembroke's coffee, the service cupboard, or the missing memorandum. Mr. Finch had moved repeatedly through the train and recorded details with youthful enthusiasm, yet his notebook placed him in the observation lounge during the essential interval, and 2 attendants independently confirmed his presence. Mrs. Marsh had a financial grievance concerning a failed theatrical investment, but her accidental passage through the dark corridor had supplied the only independent evidence of Meredith's presence behind the service door. Inspector Doyle possessed access to the cupboards and master keys. He also possessed no reason to stage Pembroke's room, and his ledger fixed him in another carriage when the lamp failed. Each red herring had arisen from proximity, temperament, or incomplete observation. Only Meredith stood within every necessary circle. He had handled the coffee, he had accompanied Pembroke from dinner, he knew of the private meeting, he had been heard inside the service passage, he had left the saloon before my arrival, he had carried the newspaper later used to stage the compartment, and he knew of the memorandum now missing from the portfolio. The evidence formed a pattern. It did not yet form a complete account. Mr. Pembroke looked towards me. "You believe he searched my compartment while I was with you?" "Yes." "Then why arrange it to appear occupied?" "Because anyone who saw the light and locked door would avoid entering. The deception gave him privacy to search and time to remove what he needed." "But why conceal my collapse in the cupboard?" "That is the contradiction." I walked slowly to the window. "If his purpose was merely to steal the memorandum, helping you openly to your compartment would have been simpler. A sudden illness would explain his presence. No false timeline would be required. Then something occurred that he could not allow anyone to witness. Or something was intended to occur." Behind me, Doyle said, "You think the plan failed?" I turned. Mr. Pembroke remained unconscious long enough for Meredith to believe he had more time than he did. Yet he recovered, reached the saloon, and met me. Pembroke's brow tightened. "Reached it alone?" "That remains uncertain." I looked at the half-finished cup I remembered from our first meeting, the cup Meredith had removed moments before Hale arrived, and the missing memorandum whose theft explained the search but not the elaborate concealment preceding it. One decisive question remained. Not whether Meredith had deceived us, the evidence of that was now substantial. The question was what he had expected the deception to conceal. I closed the portfolio and handed it to Pembroke. "Inspector Doyle, please ask Colonel Ashcombe, Mr. Finch, and Mrs. Marsh to assemble in the private saloon. And Meredith?" "Especially Mr. Meredith." Doyle inclined his head and left. Pembroke studied me. "Are you prepared to accuse him?" "No." "Then why gather everyone?" "Because the facts are complete enough to be tested in his presence." I extinguished the lamp in the supposedly occupied compartment. The room disappeared into darkness at once, and the illusion it had sustained for so long vanished with it. "We know where the false timeline began," I said. "We know who constructed it, how the compartment was staged, and what was taken."
I opened the corridor door. What we do not yet know is whether the missing memorandum was the object of the plan. The train rounded a broad curve, carrying the lamplight slowly across the polished panels, or merely the object Meredith hoped we would discover first. Inspector Doyle required little time. The Midnight Express had settled into that profound stillness which belongs only to trains long past midnight. Most passengers had retired. Those who remained awake did so quietly, as though instinctively reluctant to disturb the measured rhythm of the journey. The private saloon had been prepared once more. A fresh lamp burned upon the central table. Outside, rain continued its patient descent across the blackened windows, while the faint reflection of every occupant drifted upon the glass whenever the train passed through deeper darkness between distant signal lamps. Colonel Ashcombe arrived first. Mr. Finch followed, notebook conspicuously absent for perhaps the first time that evening. Mrs. Marsh entered with composed curiosity, and Inspector Doyle remained near the door. Mr. Meredith came last. He greeted Mr. Pembroke with the same calm warmth he had displayed throughout the journey. "Arthur." "Charles."
There was no visible strain between them beyond that which the circumstances naturally imposed. Meredith looked towards me. "I understand you wished us assembled." I did. "If there is anything I can contribute, you have only to ask." "I intend to." He seated himself without hesitation. For several moments no one spoke. The train rounded a broad curve. The lamp swayed gently overhead before becoming still once more. I remained standing. "Before asking questions," I said quietly, "I should like to establish those matters upon which we are all in agreement." No objection was offered. First, I looked towards Pembroke. Mr. Pembroke left the dining carriage shortly after coffee had been served. Yes. He was accompanied by Mr. Meredith. Meredith inclined his head. Certainly. Colonel Ashcombe observed that Mr. Pembroke appeared unsteady. I did. Mrs. Marsh later heard Mr. Meredith speaking reassuringly to someone behind the service door. Yes. Mr. Pembroke now recalls sitting within the service cupboard after leaving dinner. He answered himself. I do. I continued. Mr. Meredith subsequently returned alone to the dining carriage. Briefly, Meredith replied. Quite. You informed those present that Mr. Pembroke required nothing further that evening. I believe I did. You later instructed Mr. Hale that Mr. Pembroke was waiting in the private saloon. Yes. You were then seen leaving the saloon carrying a cup and a folded newspaper. Meredith looked thoughtfully at Hale. If he says so. He does. Meredith offered the faintest smile. I've no reason to dispute him. I nodded. So far, every fact we have discussed has been confirmed either by your own account or by independent witnesses. Naturally. He folded his hands upon his knee. I've always found accuracy preferable. As have I. The words were received without emphasis. Mr. Finch shifted slightly in his chair. The Colonel watched Meredith with increasing attention. I crossed slowly towards the window. Next, the compartment. No one interrupted. It contained every appearance of recent occupation. I allowed the observation to settle. The lamp was burning. The blind was lowered. The door was locked. A newspaper lay upon the table. A glass of water had been placed beside it. The walking stick rested where one expected to find it. I turned. Yet the room showed remarkably little evidence that Mr. Pembroke himself had occupied it after dinner. Meredith remained entirely composed. I understood you had already reached that conclusion. I had. And now, I have reached another. His expression did not alter. The newspaper. I placed it upon the table. When first examined, it appeared entirely ordinary. I opened it carefully to the financial pages. The missing strip was overlooked. From my notebook, I produced the fragment discovered beside the compartment seat. It matched the torn edge precisely. Mrs. Marsh leaned forward. Mr. Finch stared silently. The newspaper found in the compartment had certainly been opened there. Meredith regarded the page with quiet interest. So it would appear. No objection? None. You carried a folded newspaper after dinner. So several people believe. They agree remarkably closely. They may. His voice remained measured. I confess I fail to see the importance. Do you? I do. I replaced the fragment inside my notebook. The compartment was searched. Pembroke looked towards Meredith. My memorandum disappeared. Meredith answered him gently. I can offer no explanation for that. Not yet, I said. The solicitor turned to me. You believe I searched Arthur's compartment. I believe someone did. And because I carried a newspaper, I become the obvious candidate. Not because you carried a newspaper, I paused, because your movements intersect every unexplained event. Silence returned. No one attempted to interrupt the observation. I continued quietly. You accompanied Mr. Pembroke from dinner. Yes. You were present during his collapse. Yes. You did not report that collapse. No. You returned alone. Briefly. You explained his absence. I attempted to avoid unnecessary concern. You directed Mr. Hale? Yes. You entered the private saloon before Mr. Hale arrived? I did. And afterwards Mr. Pembroke's compartment appeared occupied despite his absence. Meredith considered me for several seconds. I don't dispute any of that. The answer surprised more than one person present. Even Colonel Ashcombe looked up sharply. Meredith continued, "I've never denied accompanying Arthur, nor concealing his indisposition. No. Why? He answered immediately, because he asked me to. Every eye turned towards Pembroke. I never—" He stopped, his brow furrowed. He looked genuinely uncertain. Meredith spoke quietly. "You told me you did not wish the others alarmed." Pembroke pressed one hand against his forehead. "I don't remember." "I appreciate that." Meredith's voice carried unmistakable sympathy. "You were extremely pale. I suggested calling Inspector Doyle. You declined." "Did I? You insisted you merely required a few moments to recover." The explanation possessed a quiet plausibility. No one present could immediately contradict it. I did not attempt to. Instead, I asked, why the service cupboard? The nearest place to sit. Why not his compartment? He said he wished to avoid attracting attention. And afterwards? When he recovered sufficiently, I accompanied him to the private saloon. Did you remain? Only long enough to ensure he was comfortable. The coffee? I brought it. The newspaper? I left it there. A slight movement passed among the listeners. Mr. Finch looked ready to speak, but wisely remained silent. You left the newspaper in the saloon? Yes. It was later found inside Mr. Pembroke's compartment. Meredith spread his hands very slightly. Then someone must have moved it. The answer neither asserted nor denied, it merely acknowledged the fact. I resumed pacing slowly. The memorandum. Meredith looked directly at me. I knew Arthur intended to discuss certain financial concerns. Did you know he carried a written summary? I assumed he had documents. Did you read them? No. Did you enter his compartment? No. Not at any point after dinner? No. His answer came with complete steadiness. Inspector Doyle broke the silence. Mr. Meredith. Yes? When did you last see Mr. Pembroke's compartment? The corridor, perhaps? The door?
I couldn't say. You never entered? I did not. No visible hesitation accompanied the reply. I looked towards Hale. When you saw Mr. Meredith leaving the private saloon? Yes, sir. Did he carry only one newspaper? The attendant blinked. He thought carefully. I believe so. You believe? Yes, sir. Not certain? No. That mattered. Every witness thus far had described folded paper. No witness had actually examined it. The newspaper itself had become accepted fact, much as Pembroke's supposed presence had earlier become accepted fact. I returned to the table. Our investigation has suffered repeatedly from one difficulty. The company listened without movement. We observe one thing. We conclude another. The two become inseparable. I touched the folded newspaper. We have all referred to this newspaper as though it accompanied Mr. Meredith throughout the evening. I lifted it. No witness has actually identified this particular newspaper. The distinction appeared almost disappointingly small, yet several expressions changed at once. Colonel Ashcombe removed his spectacles. Mrs. Marsh looked thoughtfully towards the torn page. Mr. Finch frowned in concentration. Only Meredith remained unreadable. I turned towards him. You have answered every question directly. I've tried to. You've acknowledged concealing Mr. Pembroke's collapse. I have. You've admitted bringing coffee. Yes. You've admitted visiting the private saloon. Certainly. But throughout our conversation, you've been careful never to confirm a single event occurring inside Mr. Pembroke's compartment. Meredith met my gaze. Because I wasn't there. I wonder. He waited. So do I. The words remained suspended between us. Not accusation, not acceptance. Simply an unresolved possibility. I closed my notebook. We have established considerably more than we possessed an hour ago. No one disagreed. We know why Mr. Pembroke disappeared from public view. We know why the passengers believed he had retired. We know a memorandum vanished. We know a compartment was arranged to discourage interruption. I allowed my eyes to pass slowly from one face to the next. Yet one question remains entirely unanswered. Even the train itself seemed quieter.
If the object of the deception was the memorandum, I looked finally towards Meredith, why was it necessary to persuade the entire train that Mr. Pembroke occupied a compartment in which, as every one of us now knows, he never truly remained? The rain whispered steadily across the windows. No one offered an answer, and for the first time that night I had the distinct impression that the silence itself had become evident. I closed my notebook. We have established considerably more than we possessed an hour ago. No one disagreed. We know why Mr. Pembroke disappeared from public view. We know why the passengers believed he had retired. We know a memorandum vanished. We know a compartment was arranged to discourage interruption. I allowed my eyes to pass slowly from one face to the next. Yet one question remains entirely unanswered. Even the train itself seemed quieter. If the object of the deception was the memorandum, I looked finally towards Meredith. Why was it necessary to persuade the entire train that Mr. Pembroke occupied a compartment in which, as every one of us now knows, he never truly remained? The rain whispered steadily across the windows. No one offered an answer, and for the first time that night I had the distinct impression that the silence itself had become evidence.
The silence remained unbroken. Beyond the windows, the rain had softened to a steady whisper. It no longer beat against the glass with the violence that had accompanied our departure from London. The storm still enclosed the train, but its anger had diminished, leaving only darkness, wet rails, and the muted pulse of steam carrying us northward. Mr. Meredith sat with his hands folded. His composure had not deserted him. Yet composure, when maintained too carefully, sometimes reveals the precise boundary beyond which a man dares not allow himself to move. I placed the newspaper upon the table. The compartment was not arranged merely to conceal a search, I said. Had that been its sole purpose, the deception need only have lasted a few minutes. You might have entered, taken the memorandum, and left the room exactly as you found it. Meredith watched me steadily. Instead, the lamp was left burning. The blind was lowered. The door was locked. A glass of water was placed upon the table. A newspaper was left where a traveller might be expected to read it. I looked around the saloon. Those details were intended to survive inspection from the corridor. Colonel Ashcombe said, to persuade us Pembroke was inside. Yes. But why? Because Mr. Meredith required 2 periods of time, not 1. For the first time, the solicitor's eyes altered. The change was small, a slight narrowing, nothing more. I continued. The first period began when Mr. Pembroke left dinner. I turned towards him. You had discovered irregular transfers within your companies. You carried the memorandum north because you intended to confront your solicitor privately. Pembroke nodded. Mr. Meredith knew of that intention. He also knew what the memorandum might establish. Meredith spoke quietly. You have no proof that I diverted those funds. That question will be settled by accountants. Tonight concerns what you did after coffee. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. The coffee contained a sedative. Mrs. Marsh drew a quiet breath. Mr. Meredith did not move. The evidence was before us from the beginning. Mr. Pembroke became unusually drowsy within minutes of drinking. He could not clearly remember the conversation that followed. He required support when he rose. The waiter recalled that much of the coffee remained in the cup, which explains why the effect was incomplete. Pembroke looked towards Meredith. You poured it. Yes, I said. Mr. Finch saw him do so. Finch lowered his eyes as though embarrassed that so ordinary an observation had proved consequential. The dose was intended to render Mr. Pembroke helpless. Meredith then guided him from the dining carriage during the convenient failure of the corridor lamp. He brought him through the service door and into the emptied linen cupboard. Mrs. Marsh said, "That was the voice I heard." Yes, he told Mr. Pembroke to sit. He reassured him that the weakness would pass. I faced Meredith. You concealed the collapse because you could not permit an attendant or passenger to examine him closely. Had Inspector Doyle been summoned, the effects of the drug might have been recognized. Doyle gave a brief nod. Possibly. Meredith then left Mr. Pembroke in the cupboard while he returned to the dining carriage. His purpose was to make the departure appear ordinary. Pembroke had merely grown tired. Pembroke required nothing further. Pembroke had gone to attend to private business. Each phrase had been spoken calmly. Each had carried the others one step farther from the truth. Then, I continued, Meredith returned to the service passage. Pembroke's voice was low. What did he intend to do? Kill you?
No one reacted dramatically. The words themselves were sufficient. The train passed through a cutting. Its sound drew close around us. Iron wheels and rain briefly magnified by stone walls before the open countryside received us once more. Meredith looked towards the dark window. I went on. The method required no weapon and no struggle. A heavily sedated man could be suffocated quietly. Death might at first appear to have resulted from a seizure or failure of the heart, particularly if the body were not discovered until hours later. Pembroke sat without movement. But I was not killed. No. Why? Because you did not finish the coffee. I touched the edge of the table. The dose weakened you but failed to render you fully unconscious. Meredith believed he possessed more time than he did. While he returned to the dining carriage to establish his account of your movements, you recovered sufficiently to leave the cupboard. Pembroke's brow furrowed. I remember the private saloon. You knew you had arranged to meet me there. Confused though you were, habit and intention carried you towards it. And Meredith found me. Yes. The recollection seemed to return not as an image but as a sensation. The coffee, Pembroke said slowly. He brought it to you. Not out of kindness, I replied. He had to determine how much you remembered. Meredith's face had become very pale. I continued without raising my voice. He discovered that your memory of the preceding minutes was uncertain. More importantly, I was already aboard and expected to meet you. Your death could no longer be concealed in the cupboard without creating immediate questions. Colonel Ashcombe leaned forward. So the plan changed. Precisely. Meredith could not kill Pembroke in the saloon. Hale was approaching. I was expected. The failure of the sedative had transformed a prepared murder into a dangerous interruption. He therefore improvised. I lifted the newspaper. He left Mr. Pembroke in the saloon, sent Hale to bring me there, and used the interval to enter the compartment. Meredith said, "You have not established that. The facts establish it." I opened the financial page. You carried this paper through the sleeping carriage. A fragment from it was found beside the seat. The compartment contained the paper when opened. You deny entering the room, yet you are the only person traced continuously from the dining carriage to the cupboard, to the saloon, and then through the sleeping car with the very object later found inside. He said nothing. You searched the portfolio for the memorandum. Then you staged the compartment. Pembroke looked towards me. But why if I was alive in the saloon? Because Meredith had not abandoned the murder. The answer settled heavily upon the room. He required the train to believe you had retired. Once our meeting ended, you would be expected to return to your compartment. Meredith could approach you later without attracting attention. If you disappeared then, everyone would place the disappearance after your supposed retirement. I glanced towards the lowered blind of the saloon window. The locked room was therefore not an account of what had happened. It was preparation for what he still intended to do. Inspector Doyle straightened near the door. Meredith's voice remained controlled. That is conjecture. No, it explains every action which the theft alone cannot explain. I counted them quietly. The prolonged illusion of occupation, the locked door, the false evidence of reading and drinking, the effort to establish that Pembroke required nothing further. He therefore improvised. I lifted the newspaper. He left Mr. Pembroke in the saloon, sent Hale to bring me there, and used the interval to enter the compartment. Meredith said, "You have not established that. The facts establish it." I opened the financial page. You carried this paper through the sleeping carriage. A fragment from it was found beside the seat. The compartment contained the paper when opened. You deny entering the room, yet you are the only person traced continuously from the dining carriage to the cupboard to the saloon and then through the sleeping car with the very object later found inside. He said nothing. You searched the portfolio for the memorandum. Then you staged the compartment. Pembroke looked towards me. But why, if I was alive in the saloon? Because Meredith had not abandoned the murder. The answer settled heavily upon the room. He required the train to believe you had retired. Once our meeting ended, you would be expected to return to your compartment. Meredith could approach you later without attracting attention. If you disappeared then, everyone would place the disappearance after your supposed retirement. I glanced towards the lowered blind of the saloon window. The locked room was therefore not an account of what had happened. It was preparation for what he still intended to do. Inspector Doyle straightened near the door. Meredith's voice remained controlled. That is conjecture. No, it explains every action which the theft alone cannot explain. I counted them quietly. The prolonged illusion of occupation, the locked door, the false evidence of reading and drinking, the effort to establish that Pembroke required nothing further,
the concealment of his collapse, and above all, the fact that the room was staged before anyone knew he would fail to return to it. Meredith looked towards Pembroke. For the first time that night, the solicitor appeared not threatening, but tired. His careful courtesy had fallen away, leaving something smaller beneath it. "You meant to dismiss me," he said. Pembroke answered after a long silence. "I meant to ask you to explain." There was no explanation you would have accepted. The money was not yours. No. Meredith's gaze lowered. It had ceased to feel like theft. A transfer here, a temporary account there. Each sum intended to be replaced before anyone noticed. And then the sums grew. His words came without drama. I spent 20 years arranging other men's affairs with perfect care. I believed I was entitled to some security of my own. Pembroke looked at him with profound weariness. You had my trust. Yes. The single syllable appeared to cost Meredith more than any accusation. Inspector Doyle stepped forward. The memorandum? Meredith reached slowly into the inner pocket of his coat. Doyle moved at once, though there was no need. The solicitor withdrew a folded document and placed it upon the table. Pembroke did not touch it. You still possessed it, I said. I intended to destroy it. But you delayed. Meredith looked towards the paper. One delays many things when one has spent a lifetime believing that calm consideration will provide an escape. Doyle took the memorandum. No struggle followed, no raised voice. Meredith merely sat while the train carried him onwards through the rain. The others withdrew gradually. Colonel Ashcombe accompanied Inspector Doyle and Meredith towards the guards' compartment. Mrs. Marsh returned quietly to her room. Mr. Finch lingered long enough to look at the abandoned newspaper, then closed his notebook without writing anything. At last, only Pembroke and I remained. Hale brought tea. The cup stood upon the saloon table, releasing thin curls of steam into the warm lamplight. Pembroke held his without drinking. 20 years, he said. Yes. I trusted him more than any man in my employ. That was why he came so near to succeeding. Pembroke looked at me. You suspected him early. No, the admission seemed to surprise him. I trusted him as well. Outside, the rain had diminished further. The drops slid quietly across the glass, and the darkness beyond seemed less turbulent than before, though no trace of daylight disturbed it. What first convinced you? He asked. Nothing convinced me at first. I lifted my cup. The compartment taught me that appearances had been arranged. The witnesses taught me that the timeline had been arranged. The missing 5 minutes taught me who had arranged it. The unnecessary length of the deception taught me why. Pembroke considered this. And the others? Colonel Ashcombe searched for spectacles already in his pocket. Mr. Finch sought an interview he was embarrassed to admit. Mrs. Marsh argued with you over an investment. Inspector Doyle possessed keys because keys were his business. A faint smile touched Pembroke's face. Very ordinary explanations.
Most innocent behavior is ordinary when fully understood. The train began to slow. Far ahead, a whistle sounded across the wet countryside, long and subdued. Steam drifted past the window in pale folds before dissolving into the night. Pembroke finally drank his tea. What happens now? Inspector Doyle will arrange for Meredith to be handed into custody at the next principal stop. Your accountant will provide the duplicate records. The company will continue. And I? You will sleep, I hope. He glanced towards the corridor. Not in that compartment. No, Hale had already prepared another. We sat without speaking for several minutes. The wheels moved more slowly beneath us. China rested quietly upon its saucer. The fierce storm with which the evening had begun had softened into a gentle rain that followed the train through the darkness without urgency. At length Pembroke rose. He looked older than he had at dinner, though steadier. Good night. Good night. When he had gone, I remained beside the window with the final warmth of the tea between my hands. The mystery had seemed to concern a man who vanished from a locked compartment. In truth, the compartment had contained nothing but an idea formed from lamplight, silence, and the willingness of reasonable people to complete an unfinished story for themselves. The train gathered speed once more. Its wheels resumed their patient rhythm, and the midnight express carried us onwards through the rain while the sleeping countryside remained hidden beyond the glass.